Hi, I'm Nat.
And I'm Guy. And we got a little bit of construction going on, so if there's some noise, please forgive it. But we're going to talk Marjorie Taylor Greene today. Her and Donald Trump have been having a bit of a conflict. We'll get into all that and updates on Venezuela, Russia, and a lot of other political subjects today.
Yes.
Okay, let's get right into Marjorie Taylor Greene, I guess.
And let us know in the comments what you think about any of the stories. We do read all the comments, and they do help move the show along because we love to know what you all think as well. Also, if you haven't subscribed or liked or shared, please do so. There is a construction we're talking about. If you can't hear it, great. If you can, we're sorry. We have a neighbor that's doing basically a different house.
Okay, let's do it.
So from Red Wave Press, Fox News alert, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene is resigning from Congress. Her last day will be January 5th, 2026. She says, I have too much self-respect and dignity. I love my family way too much and do not want my sweet district to have to endure a hurtful and hateful primary against me by the president we all fought for, only to fight and win my election, while Republicans will likely lose the midterms, which I agree with, and in turn be expected to defend the president against impeachment after he hatefully dumped tens of millions of dollars against me and tried to destroy me.
Yeah, there's a split going on in the conservative movement right now. Trump's extremely corporatist, focusing on overseas issues. A lot of people want America first issues like Marjorie Taylor Greene. This being said, she's trying to save her political future, perhaps. I know J.D. Vance is much more aligned with the America first, so maybe if he takes over and that's where it goes, we can see the reemergence of her. She's also rated number 3 in the political betting polls right now for 2028 presidential candidate. That would also mean vice president could possibly be a thing for her. So I think she's really preserving her political future by not having this huge confrontation with Trump right now. Also, Trump has kind of backed off on her. I took some of the articles out because he came out with favorable statements, realizing, oh no, if she goes, my voting margin in the Senate is even slimmer now, especially with Thomas Massey going to vote against him. Marjorie Taylor Greene would rarely split from Trump, so he should have really stayed on good terms with her. This Israel issue has really split the two, like it has split a lot of the party so far.
Unfortunately, but do you want to watch the Fox News thing?
Let me grab my headphones real quick.
Oh, you can kind of hear the construction, just because I can hear us as well.
And another Fox News alert, Marjorie Taylor Greene announced she's resigning. Her last day will be January 5th. MTG is a powerful voice in the party who recently had a falling out with President Trump, and she put out a statement today. I have too much self-respect and dignity, love my family way too much, and do not want my sweet district to have to endure a hurtful and hateful primary against me by the president. We all fought for only to fight and win my election while Republicans will likely lose the midterms. I refuse to be a battered wife, hoping it all goes away and gets better. And another Fox News alert, Marjorie.
And she was one of Trump's biggest loyalists. So I have to think behind the scenes, Trump was just trying to get her in line, and he's really sorry to see her go at this point. They did divide on that one single issue and maybe an issue here or there, but she was really in the House and Senate forcing congressmen to take the call when there was House votes that was going to kind of go against them, and she kind of got the party in line. She was the frontline soldier in the front lines in Congress for him.
And we do have from Marina Fall a different take, or a take that many have also given, that says MTG, Marjorie Taylor Greene, just pulled off the smartest political move of her career. Everyone's treating MTG's resignation like a loss. They're missing the entire point. MTG didn't quit because Trump scared her off. She quit because she's playing the long game, and fighting a Trump-funded primary smear campaign 2 months before election season kicks off would be spectacularly stupid. Here's what she's actually preserved: her position as MAGA's undisputed ideological leader. Pick any real MAGA issue: Epstein files, food costs, Big Pharma, America first over Israel first, military-industrial complex opposition, and she's been the most vocal, most consistent voice. That's a track record you don't want to torch in a petty primary fight. Trump called her a traitor for disagreeing on a few issues, and her response was to bow out gracefully, call out the threats, and maintain the moral high ground while staying politically viable for Senate, governor, presidency, or even VP to J.D. Vance. Down the line, the brilliant part, she exits as the principled one. who wouldn't play battered wife to Trump's vindictiveness while keeping herself as a top choice for MAGA's next generation of leadership. No messy primary loss on her record, nor algorithmic destruction campaign eating away at her credibility, just a clean exit with maximum future leverage. MTG isn't done. She just refused to let Trump decide when and how her political story ends. That's not weakness, that's chess.
Yeah, and the big problem for J.D. Vance when he does run for vice president, I assume that he's going to take over the MAGA mantle unless Marco Rubio somehow weasels his way into top position. That being said, he's going to have to realign himself with the America First base because the conservatives are really coming knives out right now. We see people like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes really trying to divide the movement. He's going to really have to realign with that America First base, but the direction Trump's going right now, he's also going to have to explain himself. He's going to have to explain that he was really being a loyalist to Trump and he would have made different decisions. His vice presidential candidate will indicate that to the base, I believe. So she's going to be definitely one of the top runners for vice presidential spot. I don't think it will necessarily be her, but he's going to need somebody that signals to the base that he's loyal to the America First side.
And especially with her resigning, again, she does take herself out of the fight completely, which I don't even know if Trump wanted to fully have. But I do see that maybe and given that he's had pollsters like Mark Mitchell from Rasmussen going to the White House, trying to explain what the hell is going on with Gen Z, with the fracturing of the right or the conservatives and the MAGA and the America First people. So I think he maybe didn't want to get into the fight because she was so loyal to him. And now he has lost that other chess piece. And what is he going to do? He really has to start acting right before the midterms to do something that actually tells people that he is America First and he's not backing away from all the promises he made during the campaign and also during the first few months where we did see a lot of action. We did see the border getting a lot better. We did see the deportations, but now, with the business moves he's making and also with the threat of his whole tariff scheme being, crippled down by the Supreme Court, he's in a tough spot where he needs to figure out how to do something that is immediately visible for the voter base and for the people that are starting to veer off into craziness,
he's bringing advisors into the administration, and he's also going to give out $2,000 checks. We have a story about that kind of coming up, but kind of back to Marjorie Taylor Greene here. There was something I was going to say. A lot of people are commenting that she's a flip-flopper, but I think she speaks her mind right off of the bat, and her constituency that she's supposed to represent doesn't always agree with her. So she's willing to put her constituency before her own foundation sometimes. One of the big issues would have been H-1B visas. She says, I'm a construction business owner. We kind of need H-1B visas. So she was on that side. But when her constituency spoke up against her and the America First movement kind of came out, she switched positions, kind of putting her constituency before her own personal needs, I guess you would say.
personal interest.
Personal interest. And I think that can be explained. I like her overall, especially for a woman. A woman's going to have to do an extraordinary job to really earn my respect. And I like her overall. There are some points you can say, but there are points with any politician you can say, well, I don't like that. And one of the big things I always say about whether it's Pierre Poilievre in Canada or other conservative candidates that really wait to take a stance on an issue until they got the polling numbers back and they know it's safe. She's never really done that. She'll come out and then she'll correct herself later and she'll say why she corrected herself. So that's to be admired. Somebody that's really willing to take a stance before the polling numbers come out, or she knows which way things are going to fall.
Do you respect me as a woman? I think you meant a woman in politics, because I continue to say I don't think women should be at the top levels of political, of having top level political positions. But and again, I don't know. They mostly always go for safety over.
And
freedom and liberty.
I think the next story we have is Bill and Hillary Clinton, and it's pretty interesting.
Speaking of somebody that never got there, from the SCIF, Bill and Hillary Clinton are officially scheduled to testify about Jeffrey Epstein in December. Bill Clinton will do so on December 17th. Apparently, Hillary Clinton will do so on December 18th. If they do not show up for their in-person depositions, a warrant will be issued for their arrest.
And this is going to be very interesting because if they do show up because they want to avoid this warrant, what are they going to testify to? Because now they can get caught in lies, and if they have documents or emails that they can kind of catch them in lies, then they're going to have charges they can press against them. And with these Epstein files, Trump really looked like he didn't want him to come out, or was he trying to play the long game to get the Democrats to vote for him? If that's the case, and he wants to say that's the case, he's going to need prosecutions, because a lot of people are starting to distrust Trump's take on this right now. But if he does get a massive amount of prosecutions before the next midterms, he's going to be able to excuse this away as I needed the Democrats to vote to release these files. The only way to get them to do that was to act like I didn't want them out. I don't know if that's the case, but that's his best card to play at this point. The best way to play it is to start with Bill and Hillary Clinton. These are high-profile prosecutions.
And I think those are the ones that people most want to see. I think those are the ones people most expect.
Well, he's not going to be able to get Bill Clinton, because Bill Clinton's got a ton of immunity. At least that's how I see it, just like all former presidents do now, because of the Supreme Court ruling that really protected Trump, but protected all past presidents. But Hillary Clinton is the person that's actually hated there. And I think it's going to be mean a lot more to the general public. Plus, if the auto pin scandal, if they can kind of erase those auto pin, what do you call those? Immunity. If you can erase the auto pin immunity, and you can go after Fauci, that's going to be huge for the general public.
There was a video. Do you want to see the video?
Yeah, let's watch
the video.
the video.
Important? Okay.
And it was expected that they were going to ghost him. Bannon tried ghosting one of these hearings, and he was thrown in jail for it. So I would hope the same thing would happen here with Bill and Hillary.
The House Oversight Committee has officially informed Bill and Hillary Clinton's attorney that they must appear for depositions on December 17th and 18th in Washington. The committee approved the subpoena on a bipartisan basis back in July. And now, Chairman James Comer says no more negotiating terms. The time has come for the former first couple to tell Congress what they know about Jeffrey Epstein. So the bill to release the Epstein files that was signed by President Trump this week is just one part of Congress's multifaceted investigation into Jeffrey Epstein and his sex trafficking ring. In July, the House Oversight Committee sent subpoenas to multiple former government officials from both Democratic and Republican administrations, demanding they be deposed under oath. The Clintons received the subpoenas and tried to negotiate. They said they can provide written answers to questions. But Committee Chairman James Comer officially informed them Friday morning that won't cut it. In a letter sent to Clinton attorney David Kendall, Chairman Comer wrote, "Your suggestion that your client's testimony would not be relevant to the stated purposes of the committee's investigation because the events in question took place outside of the Clintons' respective official duties misses the committee's point. It is precisely the fact President Clinton and Secretary Clinton each maintain relationships with Mr. Epstein and Ms. Maxwell in their personal capacities as private citizens that is of interest to the committee. If the Clintons do show up on the 17th and 18th, they will likely answer questions in private, and the committee will release a video of certain answers." Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna wrote on X, "If the Clintons defy their subpoenas, there's only one thing to do: jail time. That may not be an empty threat." Democrats subpoenaed former Trump administration officials Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro during the January 6th investigation. When they refused to comply, Democrats sent criminal referrals to President Biden's Department of Justice, which secured convictions that led to prison time.
Yeah, and that was interesting, the fact that they're saying it's outside of their official duties. So that kind of does leave the door open potentially to go after Bill Clinton, but it's going to be very hard because he does have broad spectrum immunity because he was a former president. Also, Hillary Clinton had the bleach bit scandal where she destroyed the hard drives and destroyed a lot of emails, which she had to pay a fine for, but she never did jail time for. If they can tie that into some of the questionings, there could be a major scandal and possibly a prosecution there as well.
Mm-hmm. And the Democrats continue to be... It's not me helping me concentrate.
Let's continue.
I forgot what I was going to say. But speaking of that $2,000 that is going to be given to American families from Eric Doherty, Democrats are officially in panic mode as $2,000 in a tariff dividend is set to go out to working families who need it most in 2026. Secretary Lutnick said tariffs are an American policy. The president wants the American people to understand how great tariffs are for them. One of the ways to prove to the American people how great tariffs are is to have them share in the part of one year's income from these tariffs, and that's $2,000 a head. As he said, for people who need the money, he is going to constrain it to people who need the money, and that's exciting. So the president's got that on his desk. I know that's something he wants to achieve, and his legislative team will figure out what the best way to do it.
Now, a lot of people may construe this as buying votes, and I can definitely see how people may see it as that. That being said, the tariff issue is in front of the Supreme Court right now. They're expected to rule on this very early next year, and if they rule against it, Trump's entire economic plan falls apart. So what he's trying to do here, I think it's less with buying votes and more with getting the American people on board with tariffs. And if you give them a $2,000 check, they're going to want to keep those tariffs in place. And it puts a lot of pressure on the Supreme Court through a grassroots effort of getting the people on side.
And still, I don't know if I love this because it is, once again, the government giving away money, regardless of where it's coming from, to the people. And that's just not something I agree with, or that I think is very conservative in any way. But
yeah, but it is coming through. It is coming through the tariffs, but it isn't on a regular basis. So it does really appear to be buying votes, and it looks like they're pretty desperate right now. They can see the conservative base dividing. The liberal base is dividing as well, but because the Conservative Party is in power right now, and Trump isn't on the ballot, they may just vote for the Democrats, not necessarily that they like the Democrats, because the Democrats have the lowest polling numbers I've seen in modern history, but they're kind of voting against the party in power. They've only been in power in a year, and a lot of these economic benefits aren't going to be felt to more near the end of his term.
Mm-hmm. There was a video there. Do you want to see it?
Yeah.
I'm guessing it's what Nick says, but let's see.
Look, the tariffs are an American policy. The president wants the American people to understand how great tariffs are for them. And so one of the ways to prove to the American people how great tariffs are is to have them share in a part of 1 year's income from these tariffs. And that's $2,000 a head, as he said, for people who need the money. You know, he's going to constrain it to people who need the money. And that's exciting. So the president's got that on his desk. I know that's something he wants to achieve, and his legislative team will figure out the best way to do it. But what he's trying to do is make sure people in America understand that tariffs are their policy. It's to make America stronger, and it can also benefit their pocketbook. And that is coming next year from the president. Look.
And I do think that Trump does need to do something quick, because the rhetoric continues to be, well, it's just getting worse. The prices keep getting higher. Food costs are getting higher. We can't see any of this big change or great economy that he keeps talking about. And while, yes, the tariffs are bringing in a lot of money, and we've said, it's not immediately visible or impacting people's lives. So this might be, again, a last-ditch effort to kind of say, look, it is helping. There is something happening. Here, have some money. But I don't know if it's enough.
Well, I think...
And there's also been a lot of propaganda against the whole tariffs and how expensive things we're going to get from the Democrats that I think might be having more impact now that there hasn't really been a real change in people's lives after a year.
Yeah, the things we can say about this is he's trying to pressure the Supreme Court not to take away these tariffs, because if they do, I don't know what the hell he's going to do. His whole economic policy is based around this. I think it's a good strategy. Otherwise, you're really just handing power over to China. That's what it looked like the Biden administration was. They had to do something dramatic. They're getting the largest outside investment from both public and private industry right now coming into the United States. The manufacturing is starting to be built. The issue is people aren't going to really see it for a couple of years. But also on top of that, if the Supreme Court does rule against him early next year because he can't get enough pressure kind of put on them, his only other option is to take down the filibuster. The problem is, if he takes down the filibuster, will he actually have the votes? Because with Marjorie Taylor Greene stepping down, it's very close. On top of that, do you really want to take down the filibuster if you lose the midterms? Because now you're really handing the power of your administration over to the Democrats.
Mm-hmm. And we have been talking about certain figures that might come up, even though we're still 3 years away, as presidential or vice presidential candidates. And a lot of names are already popping up, especially now with the midterms getting closer and closer. And one of them, unfortunately, even though he is very well liked here in Mexico and in Latin America, is Marco Rubio, who I really don't like. But from Politico, how Rubio's political fate is entangled with Maduro's. The U.S. move against Venezuela's dictator is resonating in Florida, home to a key political constituency of the Secretary of State.
Yeah, and things are looking pretty good for Rubio, especially if the president Maduro steps down in Venezuela, and they do it without an actual war or with minimal strikes. And then he goes after Cuba and repairs relations with Cuba by getting that dictator to step down. It's going to look really good, almost too good. He may take the pole position from J.D. Vance if that ends up being the case. The big question is, after he straightens out Venezuela and Cuba, will he start coming out after Mexico, and how will that reflect to the base of the party? If it reflects good, he will definitely become the primary candidate for 2028. And I know J.D. Vance isn't going to take a back seat. And I think right now that's why we see J.D. Vance really siding with America first where and when he can. If they try to put Marco Rubio as the major candidate, I think he's going to go with Bannon and the America First wing of the party and really represent that. There could be a huge amount of infighting at that point. That would make it a three-way conservative split: the Rubio side, possibly the Tucker side, and possibly the J.D. Vance side. I would think the J.D. Vance side, the Steve Bannon Tucker side would come together, but we would have to see.
Yeah, the Rubio side is the Rhino Uniparty side.
Yeah, it's the party of war. If Rubio gets in there, we're definitely getting war. This is why I would also go against the Democrats in 2028. The biggest thing Trump is really doing is he's delivering on a lot of these anti-war policies by not expanding into bigger wars. There's small skirmishes that are really weakening the enemies and weakening the EU from starting a broader war here.
And what does annoy me, especially with Rubio, other than himself, is that the whole Maduro thing, the whole Venezuela thing, and we continue to talk about it because we didn't even know about it, and we just found out about it last year at Mexico CPAC, but was that Rick Grinnell, when he was working for the Trump administration, had all these plans already kind of set up. The only thing that stopped Maduro from actually stepping down and continuing with the plans that were solidified mostly here in Mexico City was that Trump's presidency ended. And that was almost there. And then he was able to continue for another 5 years up to now. And now Rubio's going to take all the damn credit.
Well,
That's what I don't like.
Rubio is a former neocon. I would say he still is the neocon, and the Bush administration is talking about coming into politics. This would be a figure they would definitely back. You're going to have the conservative movement really go back a decade or two if this gentleman gets into power. Sharing power or having him in the administration is a complete different thing than having him be president or vice president.
And I don't think, again, the base, the MAGA, the America First people would be very okay with him if he is the one, the either vice president or presidential candidate. And it wouldn't be a good move, even if he does get the whole Venezuela, Mexico, Latin America area.
But I could also see him putting him in as vice president to J.D. Vance, and that's the big rumor right now in order to get the Latino vote. I definitely think he would get the Latino vote. The problem with that is J.D. Vance would really be having to watch his back at that point, because if anything happens to him, Rubio's stepping right in there. And we've already seen 2 attempts on Trump's life. So,
and I mean, the article does kind of have a point here as well, that if the effort goes sideways, it could wreck Rubio's presidential prospects instead, damaging his standing with key voters, not just in Florida, but then also if he does run in some part of the campaign. And I will also say, if they do decide to come into Mexico, there are, I mean, when we've spoken about the multiple options and why it's a really bad idea for the U.S. to really try to come into Mexico without the help or support of the Mexican government itself. But if that is the case and it goes sideways also in Mexico, that would be even more disastrous.
Well,
and I do think, and I'll continue to say, I think what's going to happen or might happen in Venezuela is just a dress rehearsal for what they're actually planning to do with Mexico. Venezuela, I don't think is such a big stick in the mud for Trump as Mexico is.
Okay.
And he has continued to say.
Let's go into the next story. I think it's the one that I kind of wanted to bring up, and this is going to kind of lead into Mexico as well. Let's see what it is real quick.
From Lord Bebo.
Yeah, this is the one.
USA gets ready to strike Maduro, and we have done this story for the past 2 weeks.
You haven't read this. Let's read the entire thing now, and I'll relate it to everything.
USA declared Cartel de los Soles a terrorist organization as of today. USA also puts Maduro as the head of this organization. The trick is Trump can strike a terrorist org without congressional approval. He can now just strike Maduro at any time without warning, since he is the head of this organization.
Okay, and that's good. That was kind of the final step Trump needed to bring in. He has to justify striking Venezuela if he wants even strategic strikes. He had already labeled this organization a terrorist organization, but now he's saying Maduro is the head of that organization. That gives him a full latitude to strike when and where he wants. I think he'll put strategic strikes on Venezuela in order to put even more pressure on Venezuela. At that point, you have to think Maduro is going to step down here. I don't think you're going to need a full-fledged war, and I think Rubio is going to get a lot of credit for it. Also being said, you see what's happening in Mexico, and that's what I was saying. That post was very important because he's already labeled a lot of these cartels within Mexico terrorist organizations. He's connected the current party in power, the Morena party, with those cartels. The last thing to do is to label Claudia Sheinbaum a terrorist as well. If he does that, just like he did here, he could possibly have strikes in Mexico. I don't think he wants that, but he wants to lay out that exact model to pressure Claudia Sheinbaum to cooperate with the U.S., I think. I think this has a bigger strategic pressure campaign on not just Venezuela, but also Claudia Sheinbaum here in Mexico.
And we also talked about, and if you haven't seen them, the riots and the march that happened on November 15th here, so 2 Saturdays ago, and how there might have been some U.S. involvement in that to, show, oh, Mexico's doing so bad, the president is doing so bad, look, their own people are trying to rise up against her. And the agitators that were there, and also the interesting independent journalists that have been recording and have been very essential for all the riots that happen in the U.S. and for that information to get out, not from a mainstream media perspective, but from a citizen journalist or independent journalist perspective, were here, and they were never here in Mexico. So we continue to see those images on X of just the riots, of not the peaceful part of the march that wasn't going viral, but a lot of commentary from a lot of people that helped Trump in a way to get to where he is. All of the commentators, independent journalists, etc., highlighting how bad it is in Mexico, how angry the people are. And that just continues to perpetuate the narrative that I think Trump needs and wants if he does actually want to say, okay, Mexico's not doing anything, we got to go in and, rescue them.
Well, yeah, initially after that protest did not look organic in its final stages where the violence happened. The actual protest itself, it was a different demographic of protesters there. They did not look violent, but it was very small. The international press gave it a lot of coverage. The Americans are especially saying they're trying to overthrow Claudia Sheinbaum. It's been a few weeks out now, and I said it was either Sheinbaum or the Americans that would have their fingerprints on it, and it's really looking like the Americans have their fingerprints all over that now. That being said, there is another protest of farmers and truckers coming up.
Right now. It happened today.
And that will be happening in the countryside, things like that.
They're blockading all the highways that lead into Mexico City and the production because they're protesting against the insecurity, but also the prices and GMO corn, etc.
It's much easier to make a protest like that look organic. So if the Americans do want to kind of pressure Claudia Sheinbaum, I think you'll see they're involved in that as well. I think it will be a lot less obvious than it was a couple of weeks ago, though. And we do see how farmers and truckers protests have worked so well in other countries. And if it works well this time, I think this is could turn into an ongoing campaign over the next couple of years.
And I do think that that's essential and important just for the actual farmers and the people that drive the truckers, all the people that are doing a blockade and kind of stop work today. Because there is that real insecurity and distrust and unsafety within the highways and within being just a farmer, being able to have crops and you are dependent upon the cartels to be able to continue to produce or move around in highways, which is insane.
Yeah.
So I do support them in that sense. But if it is a U.S. operation, which I hope it's not, then that kind of diminishes a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
But it's good to show Claudia she's doing wrong. But again, there are more things about Venezuela from Defense Intelligence. A U.S. strike on Venezuela looks imminent tonight. 2 B-52 bombers are airborne along with a refueler tank, and current flight activity makes the entire situation feel very serious. But We have seen these warnings come up
This,
again and again.
this is completely different again, and I maybe know a little bit more about stuff like this. I will say, after now that he's named Maduro the head of that terrorist organization, now he actually has sent the bombers down there, and I would expect there could potentially be a strike tonight of some sort. If not tonight, he now has the authority to do this, and he has the exact hardware you would have for strategic strikes, which are these strategic bombers. So this is going, even amping up the pressure more. I think they want to continuously amp up the pressure as they're negotiating with Maduro behind the scenes to step down. And until they get him to step down, they're going to do more and more and more. There's only so much more you can do without having a strategic strike at this point. So I think it should be coming soon, but I think it will be minimal to begin with, so they can continue to put pressure on the negotiations for him to step down.
And that was my question. Like, I do think it might just be them escalating and escalating and escalating and then not actually getting to anything.
You're going to have to. It's the largest military deployment since in modern history since the Iraq War. So you don't just put that many people down there, especially with Venezuela not being too far away from the United States. The fact that they're stationing all of that right there, and now Maduro knows the country can be hit, they're going to have to show him that they're serious. So they're going to have a strategic strike. I don't think they want an all-out campaign. This is definitely in order to get him to step down, because the MAGA base will split and fracture against Trump if this turns into a large-scale war.
But even having all of that there, like the bombers and the big ships, and I'm really bad at war terms, so I don't know what they're called, but having all of that machinery there and capable and all the tactical stuff they need might also be, and we've also, again, speculated that this is a dress rehearsal to be able to have all of that around the Caribbean and around Mexico as well, because, I mean, we're not that far away.
Well, I think we're going to talk about it. And
Yes.
oh, it is. Oh, good. That was the next article, because that goes right
And
into
this
this.
is mostly speculative, but from Eric Doherty, it's been confirmed that the massive military buildup in our own hemisphere isn't just about Maduro and Venezuela. It's about getting Russia, China, and Iran out of the Western Hemisphere. Now,
And one
that's what
second,
people would
we
want.
have talked about this. There were talks behind the scenes that China was pulling out of the region, and they did somewhat, I think, just to appease the United States. But I think the United States wants them completely out, and they're going to use the stick method, which is go after Venezuela and their other allies.
Is that actually the name of the general? Raising Cane?
Yeah,
Like Raising Cane's, like
Yeah.
the chicken place?
that came up a few months ago, actually.
I'm hungry.
Should President Trump order strikes against the Maduro regime, there's plenty of firepower in the Caribbean to do it, with about 30% of all deployed American warships, including the aircraft carrier Gerald R. Ford, now on station. There are over 200 Tomahawk cruise missiles in theater aboard destroyers, and U.S. Marines aboard the USS Iwo Jima and other amphibs in the Ready Group. Now, ahead of Thanksgiving, the U.S. military's top officer, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Raising Cane, arrived in Puerto Rico yesterday to meet the forces who were part of Operation Southern Spear. So with General Cane in the region, we'll have to see if Secretary Hegseth follows suit ahead of Thanksgiving. And one thing officials have said is some of this buildup in the Caribbean goes beyond the Maduro regime. It's about getting Russia, China, and Iran out of the Western Hemisphere, guys.
And I will say this, China is highly connected to the cartels, obviously, here in Mexico, and Venezuela would provide the perfect smokescreen to have strategic strikes against cartels in Mexico, especially if Claudia Sheinbaum is actually cooperating. Now, on the surface, it looks like she isn't cooperating, but behind the scenes, the word is she is cooperating, and she does want that tariff deal. They're dangling the carrot at her, and they want the Mexican military cooperation. So I would maybe suspect if they do hit Venezuela, they'll hit maybe these Mexican cartels at the same time. Now, they won't take credit for it. They'll say it was one cartel probably hitting the other and go in there strategically, and maybe even say it was the Mexican military, but they may not want to take credit themselves, but it gives the perfect opportunity.
And we've spoken about also how involved China has been, and not just China, again, Russia, Iran too, but China in building infrastructure and getting a lot of Latin American countries into deals and debt with them. And now they've been slowly pushed out by the governments themselves, but also by them deciding, like by China deciding that this is no longer as a strategic move as they thought. And it ended up being more expensive to them, everything they wanted to do here in Latin America, than it was worth now that the U.S. is also ramping up and trying to come in and remembering that Latin America are their neighbors and that they should maybe take care of stuff down here too.
Well, let's talk about who's on their side and who's against them, because it looks like the Chilean elections might turn to a right-wing party right now, so that would put them firmly probably on the U.S. side. Argentina is now on the U.S. side. El Salvador is with the U.S. Now, who is against the U.S.? Mexico is kind of in the middle. You have a shared power base there with Claudia Sheinbaum and the cartels. The Chinese government is mixed in there. So it's a 50-50 with Mexico. But now let's look at the hard allies of China, Russia, and the rest of them. And that would be Colombia, Venezuela. Venezuela would be the primary. Cuba. And then you have the big ally, which is Brazil. They don't want to go directly at Brazil. Brazil is a major power, but they will want to isolate Brazil by going after Venezuela, Colombia, and then straighten Mexico out. And then Brazil's kind of sitting there by themselves. They can simply apply pressure at that point, and it should crumble and make them realign with the U.S. I think they would go into Brazil through elections, not military force.
And Sidekick says, hey, Nat, hey, Guy. Hello. How are you? Thank you for being here.
No more construction. We started the show with some loud construction.
But again, we are talking about China, how they have been creeping all around the world, essentially. And we did show on Friday, show clips of the South Koreans and I believe it was Thailand.
Yeah.
Finally doing something about all these shipping vessels, like fishing vessels that China sends out mostly illegally to pilfer the world's oceans.
Maybe I'll just say this. A lot of the stories may look similar day to day, especially over the last 2 or 3 weeks, but there's a small escalation. It seems like every episode we have. The thing with Venezuela being labeled as a terrorist organization and putting those B-52 bombers down there is definitely an escalation. And there's escalations in the Chinese region as well. So I think we have a series of stories about this.
Yes.
And I know if it sounds similar, no, every single week it seems like things are just escalating in increments.
So from Nguyen Thi Hong, quite suspicious, a 98-ton Chinese vessel sank just 80 kilometers from South Korea's Gajeo Island, an integral part of South Korea's territory. The ill-fated vessel had 11 members on board, out of which 2 were ended and 3 went missing. Why was the Chinese vessel in South Korea's?
So yeah, we showed 2 other vessels, one off of Taiwan, one off of Japan. There was a third one I didn't report on last week, but now we have this vessel. These countries are definitely taking hold of their waters again and saying, this is our territory. If you come in them, we will shoot them down, whether that's military vessels or fishing vessels. I would expect them to start defending the airspace fairly quickly. The U.S. has sent surface-to-air missiles over there, so countries like the Philippines will now have the ability to protect that airspace. And I've talked about this in the past, but when the U.S. war games a war with China, the U.S. always loses. The only way they can win is by shutting off shipping lanes. The first thing they have to do if they want to start shutting off shipping lanes and controlling international waters is get these countries that are aligned with the U.S. to start defending their own territory, whether that's their own waters or their own airspace.
And I think, again, this might also be covertly or because we just saw Trump go over to Asia to do a bunch of things, and then Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, run next to him like a little shadow dog. But this might also be with support from the U.S. because they're trying to manage multiple poles of dominance that they see as important, especially with Taiwan, China, etc.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. The Asian region compared to the Central and South American region. A lot of the Central and South American countries aren't as developed as the United States. So working as an ally with the United States is far more likely. But in the Asian regions, a lot of these little countries are actually very well developed, like Japan, like Taiwan, like South Korea. So rather than having a hegemonic power in the region like China, it would make more sense if you had a bunch of small powers to kind of spread wealth around in that region. I'm sure that's what they're kind of fighting for, and that's what they want. That's why they're aligning with the U.S. They would rather share power and share their economy with each other rather than have everything having to go through China.
And especially with Japan, it is like finally now that there's a new Prime Minister, Sanae Takechi, I think that's how you say it, with her being, based and conservative and etc., being in a rock band. Like Japan now has been able to fully speak out even more against China and what China wanted to do.
Yeah, they definitely have been speaking out, and not just them. It makes it very much a lot easier for other countries to start speaking out. So you're seeing these alliances of countries kind of not only speaking out, but starting to stand up for themselves by defending their sovereign territory and actually accepting weapons from the United States that they can defend themselves
And
with.
I was going to say they would only do that if they had sufficient means of defending themselves against China, which means the U.S. is involved in some way.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, Russia wouldn't turn their back on China, I don't think. And any other of the big powers
No, but Russia
wouldn't be helping them. So it has to be the U.S.
Yeah, I will also say about the Prime Minister of Japan, I like her. She's very conservative. It's good to see somebody that strong in Japan kind of standing up for that country. That being said, her power base is really fractured right now, and there are a ton of protests because she's making such strong statements against China. The people in China really don't want a war. I can understand that sentiment. And it's going to be interesting if she can hold a power base in power so she can stay in power.
And from Visegrad 24, Japan refuses to bow down to Chinese pressure over Taiwan and announces that it's deploying medium-range missiles to Yonaguni Island, just 110 kilometers east of Taiwan. Japan says it's doing so to decrease the likelihood of a Chinese invasion attempt against Taiwan.
Yeah,
So it's right there.
And if a larger war does break out with the U.S. and China, the U.S. can't necessarily sanction China because their economy is too coupled in with them, but they can limit them. The U.S. themselves wouldn't be able to limit them, but they can get these countries that kind of surround China to start shutting off strategic points so they can't get their shipments out. Manufacturing is really the big leg of the Chinese economy that holds everything up. If shipping lanes starts to get cut off to China, it's going to have a major impact. And I think this is the strategy. First, they weaponize these small regional countries just off the coast of China, have them defend territorial waters, and then perhaps escalate and cut off shipping lanes, which would therefore absolutely cripple the Chinese economy.
And we have seen, I guess because we are from Vancouver, well, I lived in Vancouver for 13 years, I do understand a bit better how all of these Asian countries relate to each other, how they're not all friends. Like when I was just here in Mexico, I thought everybody was, but they don't really like each other that much. And they don't, in certain ways, they're always kind of infighting against each other. And there are hierarchies that are very marked within all of the Asian sphere countries. And we are seeing more and more people being upset with Chinese people because of the attempted dominance from, I guess, their government, but maybe also even the people.
Yeah, and I just kind of threw this in here to show the sentiment on the ground is really escalating. A lot of these Asian cultures are very polite. So when you see scenes like this, you can understand.
Well, they're very polite on the surface.
There's tensions there. That being said, a lot of the voter bases of these countries are starting to swing towards China, but there's a big groundswell of resentment against Chinese as well. So you're really having this bipolar kind of fracturing of these societies of, do we want to cooperate with China or do we want our independence? And this kind of just shows it boiling up on the surface. This is in the Philippines. This is a Filipino talking to a Chinese woman in English. English is very widely spoken in the Philippines. And if you're going to speak to somebody else in a language, you're usually not going to use Filipino. If it's a foreigner, English is the common language they use.
And it does seem a little bit like a TV show, but maybe they just had good lighting.
We are immigration. This is the Philippines. This is China. Now you have to go with us and follow our rules. Go now.
It does seem a little bit like a TV show, but I mean, it is obvious and clear that if the governments are already escalating, the people will be.
Well, yeah, and you're seeing these voter blocks. Really, it's, are you pro-Chinese or are you pro-independence? The pro-independence movement is not necessarily always the pro-American movement. It's just anti-China. Economically, it would be in the Asian region's best interest if they had shared economic power and everything didn't have to move through China, because China's going to take their cut and they're going to really have an oversized political influence in the region.
Mm-hmm. never moving back to Mexico because I guess the stories were a little bit jumbled. But here in Mexico, they're trying the same thing that we've seen tried both in Vancouver, where we're from, and elsewhere, which is take from the rich to give to the poor, but actually just create a giant kind of Ponzi scheme or just a way to get money back to themselves and to the government because from Jackson Hinkle, Mexico City to expropriate 400 buildings to build public housing, because that's always a great idea.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily against it as much as you are, especially in a poorer country like Mexico. But I just don't trust the level of corruption that's in the country. That's the big thing. I would completely agree with programs like this, even more large-scale programs where housing is built for the most impoverished people in the country because the economy is just not big enough to provide enough jobs and economic wealth for the poorest citizens. That being said, usually projects like this don't end up well and politicians line their pockets. But if you could have a project like this with complete transparency and prove how well it worked, I think you can get another one going and another one, and it would be nice to see that. I just don't trust the level of corruption in the country.
And I mean, we also know the level of corruption in places like Europe and Canada is also very high. They just hide it better. But we've seen it tried both in Europe and in Canada and elsewhere and in the US, and it never works.
But I will say this as well. Trump is giving out $2,000 checks to citizens,
which I don't agree with.
Trying to get votes. But this is another way. So it might not be as corrupt as we would normally think, because Claudia Sheinbaum really wants to get a voter base off of projects like this so she can actually deliver. You're going to have a lot of loyal voters, I would suspect anyway.
Well, this would be more for Clara Brugada, who is the governor of Mexico City, but still, I think it's dumb. I translated this article from Spanish to English, but Mexico City, they will expropriate 400 properties for housing, just to kind of understand what's going on. The government of Mexico City is considering expropriating 400 properties in this 6-year term in order to guarantee the right to decent and affordable housing for the lower income population. According to the Legal Department and Legal Services, in the first year, 38 expropriation decrees were issued. And again, who is issuing it? Who is doing the checks and balances? To whom are they issuing it?
And who are they taking these apartments from is very important as well, especially because of what we see in Canada with land rights really going back to Aboriginal tribes. Could this be step one to kind of normalize this behavior of taking property from one group and giving it to another, and then further expand that out through something similar to what's happening in Canada?
And also, who's going to check for the standards of quality and of building materials and of the building themselves? We have a lot of earthquakes here in Mexico City, but of which 27 were published in the official Gazette in favor of the Housing Institute and 11 in favor of the Commission for the Reconstruction of Mexico City. A lot of these institutes were created by Morena, full of Morena people. So again, in the same period, 39 declarations of public utility were published, of which it is expected that in the remainder of the year, the expropriation of another 11 properties will be achieved for popular housing or will be used for families affected by the 2017 earthquake. These are deteriorated properties in different neighborhoods of Mexico City that are considered high structural risk, both for their occupants and for the community where they are located.
Yeah, and I really hope this does work, and I hope corruption doesn't seep its way into this like everything else, but I'm sure it will. That being said, man, I would like to see some kind of complete transparency, line by line accounting that people can kind of go into to make sure this is 100% transparent. So a program like this can work in a country like Mexico and it can be expanded.
That is a very big dream you have. Because again, if you don't know, Morena right now, the current party within the government, and that is essentially owns all of Mexico, all of the powers within Mexico, they are like good socialists. They create their own institutes, they populate them with their own people, and then all of the checks and balances are done by their people. So it's a level of corruption that's even higher than what we had before.
Yeah, well, I understand that. But when you look at something like this and you can understand, it is needed, and you say, okay, the biggest barrier here is actually corruption, I would like to see things to make it completely transparent, radically transparent, so we can force the government, even though it's in their own interest, for a program like this to work. And the only way to do it is to get rid of corruption. The only way to do that is line by line accounting and transparency, that it's put online for the public to see.
Well, it would be to completely reform the Mexican political system from the start.
Yeah, but you're not going to reform a whole system, but maybe you start with one program like this.
And again, this was announced here in Mexico. They announced a lot of things and big projects, and they never get done. So it might be just a sueño guajiro. It might
And
never
I
happen.
will say this, the population of Mexico is absolutely huge. So 400 buildings isn't a lot, but it is a start. I hope the program works. I hope they can be transparent with it.
I hope it even exists. Because again, this might just be a way for certain construction companies to get these permits to tear down the old buildings, but then build their own whatever they want to build,
Well,
and for it to be not for housing as a housing initiative, but just to build new construction.
We talked to somebody at the conservative conference we went to the other day, and they were talking about contracts like this being handed out in Canada. And one dump truck would go around the block 7 to 9 times, finally dump off the load. Every time they went around the block, they would count that as a delivery of concrete. So they would charge for between 7 and 9 loads of concrete, and actually only deliver one, and that would create an excess of money that they would then align the pockets of politicians and people that were in with the politicians.
And I did a whole report in Vancouver about Atira and how they were actually, it was supposed to be housing for homeless people and to help and etc. But it was just them giving contracts to each other, and with the lady of the construction company for the impoverished being handed money from his husband that worked in the government and that would give these contracts directly to his wife. So
Well,
again, it happens everywhere.
And the same thing happened in California. Over $1 trillion spent in California on the homeless situation, and it's only getting bigger every year. That $1 trillion, if addressed at the problem, should be able to solve the problem. Yet it's not because of corruption. And it's one thing to have corruption in Canada or in California. It's another thing when you have it in Mexico like this. A lot of people do need housing, and it's a life and death situation. So it's especially
well, in Canada, they've made it into a life and death situation as well.
Well, it's especially heartbreaking here in Mexico when you see the level of corruption in government when people actually need these resources.
Yes. And speaking of resources and money and levels of corruption in our Mexican government, now they came up with an even stupider idea, and which we have been warning about, and that it's happening all around the world. It's not just here, but Mexicans only like to focus on what happens in Mexico. So here it is. From Juan Carlos Martinez, Mexico is preparing to launch its digital peso by 2026, joining the growing list of nations transitioning towards digital currencies. The Bank of Mexico, or Banixco, is developing this central bank digital currency to modernize payments, expand financial institution inclusion, and strengthen the country's financial infrastructure.
Now,
the rollout will happen in phases, first testing, then a limited pilot programs, and eventually public use through mobile apps and banks. The goal is to make transactions faster, cheaper, and more accessible, especially for the unbanked population and cross-border remittances. Globally, Great Britain, we've spoken about Great Britain and how many other nations around the world have started to adopt this idiocy.
Now, the Mexican government will implement these things, but they'll never actually take root unless the U.S. comes in here and gets rid of the cartels. Now, that's currently happening on one front. I don't know if that's going to succeed or not, but if that fails, I don't think there will be a functional digital ID or a functional digital currency. They'll have them. They'll say they're doing them to appease their other masters, like the globalists, like the U.S., like other places. But as long as the cartels are here, this will never really happen in a way where it's 100% completely mandatory, tracked, and they have complete control over the society. That's the one good benefit about having shared power with the cartels. Digital ID and digital currency will not be able to root in Mexico like it will in other places around the world.
But we also saw the Mexican government speaking with the Trump administration about the implementation of digital ID and digital currency, and how the U.S. might actually make it a requisite to continue with the help and tariffs, etc., if Mexico is able to digitalize and get more people banked, because there's a lot of people here that don't use bank accounts. They just rely on cash still, and I think that's the best option. But
well,
there is a clear U.S. involvement in all of these initiatives, kind of like you do it first, and we'll see if we can do it.
Yeah, this all tracks back to the U.S. The U.S. sees Mexico as an up-and-coming region. I mean, the future of Mexico actually does look really bright as far as the economy goes. The U.S. is looking at digital IDs and digital currencies. They would love to bring it in a region like this. The thing is, if they were just telling the government would have to do it because they would have no choice. But you have the cartels in a shared power structure that are going to oppose this with everything they have. They will implement these things, but there won't be broad adoption like other places in the world unless the cartels disappear somehow.
And again, with the corruption and the lacking infrastructure that we do have in Mexico, where the digital ID that they've tried to implement, you have to print and laminate yourself, which is ridiculous. But it is harder to implement these kinds of things. But if the US does come in and try to help, especially with someone like Larry Fink or some other person that's really into all of these technologies and being able to show how they actually work elsewhere so they can then bring it into the US, it could be done, I think, but it can't just be done by the government themselves. Again, with the levels of corruption and the lacking infrastructure and lack of technological knowledge that most of the government has right now.
The cartels do not want to have their money in digital currency, and they do not want to be able to be completely identified and tracked. So it is really a stopgap to actually implementing a lot of this stuff. Also, the fact that the banking system is just now starting to spread credit here in Mexico. It's very hard to get a bank account in Mexico. Most people, or a large portion of Mexicans, don't even have a physical ID. So even implementing the digital ID right now has massive barriers because they weren't even able to implement a regular ID before that.
And again, we have spoken about the dangers and the worries of digital currency and how they try to push it into different countries. And we've seen them try to push it into different countries. Again, I translated this from Spanish to English, but Sheinbaum announces to plan to promote digital payments and reduce the use of cash in Mexico. And they're going at it by saying that it's going to be good for the economy to increase the use of digital payments, reduce circulation of cash. And then some of the benefits that they're touting are security, making it a formal economy, which can be taxed, and comfort, and that it's easier and faster to do digital payments. And the federal president stresses that digitalization is going to help us out a lot, help them control the population more a lot against socialist government. And they're giving examples like Brazil, China, and India as success stories where this has been already implemented. And again, this is just a proposal that's been talked about, not even announced. It will be announced very soon, but again, they do want to do this through the lens of this is going to be easier, faster, allow us to track the money and get rid of fraud.
Well, they would have to have a ton of money to give out. They're going to have to give out a UBI or regular remittances,
and they do already kind
to
of
the population. In order for the population to get that, maybe you say you have to have a digital ID, and that's one way to spread it out. But I don't even see, even if you do that, people will go use that money right away at the store and then not use their ID and other things for a lot of other reasons.
Well, and lucky for Morena, they do have a system that they implemented all the way since AMLO, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, was president, where as good socialists, they wanted to give money away to people to gain their trust, but also gain control over them. And they did a lot of this through the essentially welfare or well-being grants and well-being, just access to money for the people. And the way that they were able to first implement this was through giving the money out through a specific entity that most people had to go register or go to anyways. And this was in cahoots with businessman here in Mexico. I won't mention who it was. But essentially, they already have that system in place, and they would have the ability to do that again with digital currency. They would be able to force a large part of the population that they have under their control and they have been just throwing money at so they get their votes, to be able to implement the digital currency, at least with those that are reliant on this government money that's putting us all in debt.
Okay, let's switch regions over to Ukraine now if we can. Yeah. I think that's the next story.
From SL Canthan, looks like Ukraine agreed to the most important Trump-Russian demands, such as territorial concession. The debate is now around security, max number of Ukrainian troops, foreign troops in Ukraine, and NATO membership. No big deal for Russia.
Yeah, I thought it was going to happen, then I thought it wasn't going to happen. Now maybe it will happen because the EU really wants to continue this war, but they can't do it by themselves. Ursula von der Leyen sent out a letter the other day giving EU states three options. Option one was to send money to Ukraine to fund the war. Option two was to get massive loans out to give to Ukraine to fund the war, which would then be divided amongst EU countries. Option three was seize Russian assets, which are about $350 billion, give it to Ukraine and fund the war. She didn't give a fourth option, which would be to end the war. I think she's having a lot of pushback from member states like Poland, like Hungary, that don't want to continue the war. and they're not agreeing to any of those three things. So they're coming back with a negotiated 28-point peace plan, which isn't too different than what Trump offered. It'll be very interesting because the deal is bad for Ukraine. It's bad for the EU. It's also bad for Russia. The only person really benefiting it is the US. But if Trump can pull this off, I would be pretty impressed.
Is the US, but also people that don't want to be used as soldiers in a never-ending war, as we've seen over and over again.
Well, even if they manage to end this war, I think you're going to see the EU just start to finance a build-up of military forces so they can restart this war maybe on another front, another place on the Russian border in a couple of years.
We arrived here today with one goal, and the goal was to take, it's 28 points or 26 points, depending on which version as it continue to evolve, and try to narrow the ones that were open items. And we have achieved that today in a very substantial way. Now, obviously, like any final agreement, they'll have to be agreed upon by the presidents. And there are a couple issues that we need to continue to work on. But I think the report today is that I think today was worthwhile. It was very, very, it is probably the most productive day we have had on this issue, maybe in the entirety of our engagement, but certainly in a very long time. But work remains. And because this continues to be a working process, I don't want to declare a victory or finality here. There's still some work to be done. But we are much further ahead today at this time than we were when we began this morning and where we were a week ago for certain. Whether it's Thursday.
Russia is making absolutely massive gains on the front line. They have been for the last month. All the way through the war, they've been making small gains. Over the last couple of months, massive gains. And over the last week, even larger. That being said, this continues to put pressure on the US and the EU to actually take any deal that kind of ends this. So I think as long as Russia continues to move forward, it gives the possibility for a negotiated into this, at least for now. I know the EU definitely wants to restart this at some point. I hope Trump can pressure him to ending the war, at least for now.
And the clip was from yesterday, so there has been this back and forth, yes and no.
There's
these
a deadline.
People agree, these people don't agree.
There's a deadline of Thursday. So Trump said Thursday, you either agree or we're going to stop funding the entire thing. So I don't know if he's going to stick to that. He's made deadlines like this in the past and then kind of backed off. I think the deadline's kind of working in his disadvantage here. That being said, the fact that Russia's willing to take these terms, I'm pleasantly surprised because Russia is dramatically winning right now. There must be backroom deals to kind of have economic negotiations and sanctions being lowered on Russia if this war comes to an end.
And you did add something from CIA analyst and whistleblower from Jabrookie Man. According to Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst, the whistleblower complaint filed with the DOD and the DOJ claims $48 billion in U.S. aid was pilfered by Zelensky and friends, and these have been accusations that continue to grow, and from years and years ago as well. This one, but there's been this
This is coming directly from the Trump administration now, and these are serious allegations. One of the high-ranking officials in Ukraine just got busted with a gold toilet. You're trying to hide your money with it as a gold toilet is crazy. I think it's strategic. They've always known Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. They know where the money's going. A lot of the money is going into EU banks. That being said, this is coming to the surface now because Trump is trying to negotiate an end to this war. So what he's going to say is, all of you corrupt, he's probably saying, we have the files on you. You either come to an end of this war and agree to these terms. Otherwise, we're going to start prosecuting people. That's probably one line of pressure he's applying right now.
So the complaint is now in the hands of Pentagon Office of Criminal Investigations. And do you want to see this?
Yeah, we can play it.
Where he explains it, I guess.
Whistleblower complaint with the Department of Justice and the Pentagon regarding $48 billion. Let me emphasize billion, not 100 million. $48 billion that was pilfered by Volodymyr Zelensky and his crew. And as a result of that, the Department of War, Department of Defense, whatever you want to call it, they've opened up a criminal investigation. Whistleblower complaint.
Yeah, he wants to take that money and run. The question is, he has his masters in the EU, Zelensky does, and that's where his money's at. That's why the EU is able to tell him what to do. So if Trump can't convince the EU, the war is not going to end. And I think that's the real player he's going to have to convince. So he's going to have to use some kind of pressure on them. The fact that he's not willing to fund it anymore, if the EU tries to fund it themselves, they're going to go bankrupt. If they try to get loans for it, they're not going to pay those loans back. They're going to go bankrupt. If they seize the Russian assets to fund the war, that undermines their international banking system, and all these international countries will then pull out their money from their banking system, collapsing their entire banking system. Also, Russia has frozen assets, which are private assets, not public state assets, to the tune of almost $400 billion. So they have even more assets they can take from the Europeans. Now, when I say these are private assets, these are private company assets from companies in the EU. This has the chance to also collapse the EU stock market. So.
And we've talked about how France and the UK are already in trouble. So, and Germany as well. They touted and said that they might have to ask for help from the World Bank, who doesn't even have money to help one of them, let alone two or three of them. So they really are into between a rock and a hard place with it, by them having to say we have to continue this because it's going to, number one, help all our plans to become more evil than we already are, but also to fund their own countries as well.
Yeah, this Ukraine war has really bled the EU somewhat. It hasn't bled them dry, but if they go forward from this point, it's going to really bleed them dry, because the responsibility of funding this war is now going to be on them. And I think that's Trump's plan. Trump knows the EU wants a wider regional war in order to reset their system, reset their economy, and pillage Russia for their natural resources. So.
We have also been talking about the internal civil war between the MAGA, America First, the conservatives, and everybody else involved, all the commentators, everybody. But mostly is the figure and at the top of Nick Fuentes. And he continues to be talked about alongside with Tucker Carlson. But you had a thing about it.
Oh, yeah, let's look at it.
I'm not sure what it is. From Marjorie says, congrats, Chuck, you just made Nick Fuentes more famous.
Yeah, and now I remember this. This is actually huge. Nick Fuentes, I'm big into American politics, big into conservative politics and MAGA politics, so we talk about it quite a lot. People there in the know will know who Nick Fuentes is. Doing this, you can read what this is. This will put Nick Fuentes into the mainstream, and some of his ideas are very appealing to, I would think, the general public as well. Now, some of his ideas are completely repulsive, but that being said, you're going to put him in the mainstream by doing this.
Well, they're attractive to the disenfranchised and the fed up public, and also the uninformed public.
Well, also because he's trying to unite the left and the right. It appeals to a lot of disenfranchised Democrats that came over to the Republican Party that feel like Trump isn't kind of delivering on what he promised. A lot of Republicans are now being disenfranchised, but they don't want to go back to the Democratic Party. So that's the issue you're going to have here. But let's read what exactly Chuck's doing.
So yes, Chuck Schumer might have just made a colossal mistake. If you ever need to prove that the establishment has completely lost its grip and its mind, look no further than Chuck Schumer's latest stunt, a formal Senate resolution to condemn Nick Fuentes. That's right, America's legislative brain just took time out of its busy schedule, doing nothing useful, to tell the world that it really dislikes this one guy on the internet in his mom's basement. There's something almost touching about it. Schumer has decided that the real national emergency is a Catholic podcaster with an account and an America First bumper sticker. Imagine being so rattled by a guy's live stream that you mobilize the full machinery of the US Senate to publicly declare we reject this meme lord. And they also recently rejected socialism, like as a vote. They took a vote to reject socialism.
Yeah, in the House they took a vote, which was strange because they took a vote to reject socialism, but the vote actually had no actionable thing they were going to do from there. They just wanted to condemn socialism. This as well. Now they just want to publicly condemn Nick Fuentes. I mean, this could really backfire on them. And political circles and people that are in the know who Fuentes is. The mainstream, he hasn't really broke through there yet because he had a decade of censorship. This could really change that.
Well, and he was shown recently on CNN, which was also crazy. But this isn't a condemnation, it's a coronation. The resolution accuses Nick of promoting white supremacy and anti-Semitism, which in 2025 basically means he wants fewer illegal immigrants, he doesn't want war with half the world, and he doesn't clap on cue for the ADL, that's it. Well, he's also touted and given this idea of National Socialism, which, if you don't know, just add the first and the second words, the first two together, and it says it ends up being Nazism. He said immigration moratorium and the geriatric swamp creatures heard National Socialism. He wants efficient public services, and the media screams it's literally 1933.
Yeah, I mean, National Socialism is really becoming popular with the left and the right all around the world. We even see here in Mexico.
Here we already basically are under National Socialism, which a lot of people haven't realized that is what AMLO and Morena is, and what they've brought to us, and why we're in such a mess.
Canada's having a very similar plan.
Yes.
A lot of the EU is, I would say the next move for the EU, if they want to hang on to power, they're going to have to reject immigration because the population has rejected it so much. By rejecting immigration, they'll elevate nationalism, and they already have a socialist platform. So the EU is headed in that direction as well.
And I think it's Nick Fuentes himself has become such a big issue because of what he represents and what the Gen Zers that he represents, both on the extreme left and on the extreme right, and the dumb ideas that haven't been processed through enough brains to actually say this is a bad idea.
Well, that's not, I think you're wrong, and I know you don't like Nick Fuentes, so you're going to say something like that. But the fact is, there's nothing to counter his arguments. Capitalism isn't really working at this point for a lot of countries. Communism is not an option. So nobody's in order to defeat his ideas, you have to have better ideas. Nobody's coming with better ideas right now. I mean, Trump's doing the best he can with the capitalistic model, but with a recessing population, it makes it hard to make capitalism appealing. Capitalism really works when everything's expanding. The population is booming, expanding, the GDP is expanding. Capitalism becomes much harder to promote. Freedoms, you don't really see anybody preaching freedoms.
But I think capitalism does work even with a shrinking population, because we saw it with fewer populations. That is when capitalism was actually at its best.
When?
From the 50s all the way to the 90s.
You're wrong. Because the population exploded over the last 50 years. That's why the capitalistic model works so well. After the World Wars...
But the population total was smaller than it is right now. And I do agree with there's population decline, but we've seen it work with less people.
Listen to this. After the wars, the population was the smallest. So which way was it going to go? Bigger and bigger and bigger. And as it grew, capitalism absolutely exploded because the population was exploding. Capitalism works because it has somewhere to grow. If there's nowhere left for it to grow because it's already gone into these things, you see countries like Canada really trying to make carbon credits the new economy of the future, because a lot of these markets have
But also because
expanded.
they want to reject capitalism outright, and they want to continue with the giant bureaucracy that has formed around capitalism with all the restrictions and sanctions that they've put on actual capitalism. So we can't see it working properly because there's so many governmental stopgaps that actually stop capitalism from fully being applied
Name me
properly.
markets that aren't matured yet.
Mexico.
No, markets that aren't matured. So like AI would be a market, or housing would be a market. Most markets have matured, and most technologies have matured.
But they've matured in the current model. The model could change.
What's the new model you're proposing?
I don't know.
And that's the
Somebody else
point.
proposed it.
That's the point I was just making. If you want to counter Nick Fuentes, you have to have a new model for capitalism.
But he doesn't have a model for this insane socialism he wants to apply everywhere.
He still
He wants... It completely goes against conservatism because he wants the government to be expanded.
I understand that, but
more involved in people's lives, which is the opposite of what conservatives want.
I understand that, but you have to come with better ideas. Just like I asked you right now about capitalism, you said, well, I don't know, a new model. That's what everybody's sitting over here. Well, he's saying, okay, let's try this. You have to come with better ideas.
But he hasn't fully explained how his model is going to work either. I haven't seen an explanation from him.
Well, what I'm telling you is, if somebody wants to knock down his ideas, better than censorship would come with better ideas for the future.
Well, I mean, his whole Christian nationalism is easily knocked down because he's a Catholic. And we've seen that takedown already done.
Okay.
So I would agree with that takedown.
I think he's going to continue to gain popularity until somebody comes up with a better model of how the new capitalistic system's supposed to work.
Capitalist. Rafa says, hello, Nat and Guy. Hello, Rafa. How are you? Rafa says, seems like the U.S. right wing doesn't have anything better to do than discuss crazy dude with a camera. I agree. And unfortunately, that has been the main topic of conversation, other than Israel derangement syndrome.
One thing here, and I will say there is a new model, but they're not promoting it well. Everybody's kind of against it, and that's the Trump tariff model, which brings nationalism, and it's a new economic model. And that's why I'm so in favor of these tariffs, because we have to try something now, because the old model, we see it's starting to break down. We need to try something dramatic. Otherwise, we're just going to hand the old economic model over to China, because obviously, it works better in a communist authoritarian dictatorship where the government can actually completely control the capitalistic model. That's why this tariff experiment is so important. It gives an alternative to China, to Nick Fuentes, to everything else. But if the Supreme Court knocks it down next year, I don't know where to go from here, because honestly, the big change or the big other option is this tariff model. And it's the only thing that's kind of emerging.
And unfortunately,
but the mainstream media is knocking it down.
It's knocking it down. And unfortunately, it's not working as fast as people wanted to see results. So they've already stricken it down outright and said this doesn't work, even though from the beginning it was said it's going to take a while for it to actually work.
Phase one was to actually bring in these tariff policies. Phase two was to get the investment. He got massive public and private investment. Stage three was actually starting to build the factories. They're actually starting to do that now. We reported on over 20 major factories getting built in the United States. That's going to continue. Once those factories are built, you're going to see the production ramp up, and then that's when you're going to see the success. So I would expect by the end of his term, you should see this. Hopefully, you would see the success, unless the Supreme Court steps in and knocks it down. And then I fear that China's really going to take over at that point.
And I also think with capitalism, one of the things that made it not work as intended was the whole debt and credit system that the U.S. implemented far too far and wide and overreaching, where the debt system wasn't supposed to be originally for every single American to take on the large amounts of debt they have taken. Because if you're buying things outright and you're not saddled with debt, then you can actually see the money working within the economy, within the capitalist system. But because, and now Mexico is adopting a lot of debt and credit as well, because that was given just outright and banks were given essentially free rein to do whatever they wanted with debt and with credit cards, most people aren't don't have the actual money, and they're just cripple it with debt over and over again.
Well,
so the money can't actually go anywhere because it's fake money.
Global capitalism works great for the corporations, but it doesn't work good for the individual countries. And we're seeing with this tariff policy kind of coming in, that national capitalism is coming in, and I like to see that more. I want to see each country succeed within its borders, within the resources it has, and its own people owning its own companies. It's kind of what this America First promise was for America, but I want to see that implemented all over the world. Mexicans putting Mexico first through a national economic policy. The best way to do that is with this tariff model. If it succeeds in the United States, I think you're going to see other countries implement a similar model. That's why I think it's so important right now, because global capitalism is completely failing the people. It's driving wealth upwards. It's not distributing the wealth in a broad enough fashion.
Rafa says capitalism is expiring. It used to be so good. And again, I think part of the reason it is as bad as it is right now is the debt and the debt machine and the credit card machine that it was given too much free rein of the American people.
Yeah, but with the digital currency coming in, that model's only going to expand.
Yes.
Which is this is why the future of capitalism, a lot of the things don't look so promising. But I mean, if this idea of Trump's idea gets knocked down with tariffs, there is no other model to go to. So this national socialism idea is going to gain.
But reliance upon government is not the answer.
Yeah,
That's what we're trying to get away from.
And
it would be exactly the same.
I agree with you, but I'm telling you how you're going to have to counter this. The best counter right now is Trump's counter with these tariffs.
Yes, and unfortunately, people are way too. They don't have enough patience or understanding of how they haven't explained it properly, how the model actually works for people to say, okay, now it's not going to be in 2 weeks that we see results, but eventually it'll come. Just tell them when that eventually is and stop advertising 50-year mortgages. Rafa says, I totally agree with Guy. Capitalism isn't working anymore, but of course, socialism is not the solution. A new model is required and we should all be working on it. Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
But
I don't know what the model is. Tariffs.
It's
a good
actually
idea.
less to do with the model, I think. Every single model is going to fail in some way, shape, or form. The problem is every model doesn't build in for corruption. Capitalism actually has done the best so far by spreading wealth around the best it can and accounting for corruption somewhat. But in a socialist or communist model, you add corruption in there, that model is completely dystopian.
Yes,
and
because-
you limit freedoms of everybody in those models. But I think going forward, we need radical transparency in any model that's going to come up.
But also meritocracy. And that is what made capitalism so freeing of everybody and giving so many liberties to people and individuals that could work within the system, even if they were X, Y, and Z, with the meritocracy taken out during the whole DEI thing, but also through credit cards and debt, because now anybody can have access to invisible money and cheap money and money that's not actually free and you're saddled with debt. That actually just continues to cripple the economy itself by giving people money, but it's not actually there. So eventually they end up not owning anything. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy.
Yeah, I would like the idea of a gold-backed currency, whatever it is, dollar for dollar, being backed by actual gold, even if it's a digital currency, being backed for gold, where I can trade my digital currency for actual gold at any point in time that I want. That way, I mean, governments can't really manipulate the amount of money they have just by printing whatever they want.
And Psychic says, yes, come on, Mexico, let's go. And I think that message for Mexicans is very important. But first, you have to make Mexico realize that we are under essentially a national socialism model right now with Morena. And that is what has been given to us. And if you analyze it properly enough, compare it to what was happening in the 30s, 40s, etc. in Europe, it is very similar. And Zunzunegui, who is a historian, actually made a pretty good argument for why we are essentially under a fascistic national socialism model currently under Morena.
Well, I will also say Mexico, when you come here, there's a huge decentralized or black economy here where the money is really spread around and everybody has their own little businesses on corners. So all the money doesn't go right to these huge corporations. At least
a lot of it goes to cartels.
Yeah, a lot of it does. I mean, there's corruption in every system, but in adopting some kind of new system here in Mexico, the fact that there is those multiple economies, whether it's the corporate economy or the street economy, where families have their own individual businesses, Canada and the United States has completely lost that.
Because they've centralized power. They've centralized all their money to the government and through taxing and all the other stupid bureaucratic things you have to do to even have a business, which is impossible in Canada and almost also impossible in the US, except certain states. So I do agree, for example, today with the national blockade that a lot of the truck and agricultural workers are doing and the truck drivers, they're saying buy local, buy from your local, stall somewhere where they're selling fruit. Don't go to Walmart. Don't go to these big corporations because they charge you a lot higher and the money isn't actually going to the people that produce it and bring it to you, who are us. So that was one of the things that was suggested. And that is something that has to continue happening. And also through meritocracy, that's the way the best businesses actually work.
Well, and these conversations need to happen.
So not going towards a nationalized big government system is the answer. And Nick Fuentes is literally saying that that's what we should do. We should expand government,
but these conversations need to happen about the economy, about the future model, because capitalism is failing. It needs to happen. Even with the Trump administration, they're like, we're using the tariffs. They're not explaining their full model for the future and how the old model was collapsing. If they do that, I think people would stick with the tariffs a lot longer and maybe not be so anti, because you have to at least try something, even if it's going to fail, because at this point, America was headed on the way down. China was on the way up with the old capitalist model. That being said, when we're having these conversations, you're going to have to invite people like Nick Fuentes and the left in for their communist or their socialist ideas. Even though I don't agree with them, if we don't have a better model, we're not going to defeat those ideas.
And they're going to be able to promote those ideas even in an even stronger way. Rafa says national capitalism. Well, that's technically what capitalism was supposed to be in the first place. The whole globalist elite that decided to go the other way and to actually start implementing some of the socialist policies that we see in Canada and in the US and in Europe of free healthcare, which isn't free, of higher taxes, broke down the national capitalism model that a lot of countries were on track to continue with and started becoming this globalized, non-working, debt-riddled system that we see today. That's why it failed.
And I would say this, I might be against digital currency for individuals. I wouldn't necessarily be against a digital currency for the government, which we could kind of build in the Bitcoin model where we can see where every single dollar is spent, therefore trying to root out corruption. I think a national capitalist model that Rafa said is absolutely fantastic idea.
That's just capitalism.
The problem with that is the amount of corruption in the system. Going forward, we now have the technology where we can build transparency not only into the government, but where all this money is going that the government's kind of giving out. I want radical transparency as we move towards national capitalism, if we do.
You'll move back, because again, that's what capitalism was supposed to be. That's how it was engineered. And I don't love the Industrial Revolution and everything that happened after that, but
and this is why
that's what it was supposed to be.
And this is one of the big reasons I do not want to see the Democrats get back into power in the United States, because they're still trying to hold on to this globalist capitalist model, which is just absolutely devastating all the countries of the world, but pushing all the wealth up to the corporations. The corporations are getting more power than government because of this global capitalist model.
And again, capitalism doesn't fully work in that model, but it does work, as you said, with the different economies that we see here in Mexico, with people being able to open their own little stores and being able to trade in a way with each other and help each other out, but also rise through a more meritocratic system that's not reliant upon debt and indebting yourself to both the government and the banks.
And we have to remember right now when we're having this conversation, digital ID and digital currency is a thing that is coming in no matter what we want at this point. We can try to resist it the best we can and limit it. But if we go to a socialist or communist model, it's going to be an absolute dystopian future because the technology of digital ID and digital currency. This is why I would much rather stick with a gold-based currency, or at least stick to a capitalist model that maximizes freedoms, so we can kind of steer, even if we fail, at least we steer away from the dystopia of full government control.
And Rafa says, why don't you invite Nick Fuentes and debate him? I'd love to, but I don't think he'd come on to such a small channel, but I'd love to.
I think when he was canceled, he would have came on.
Maybe.
But we would have got canceled for having him on at that point.
Yes, but I mean, and again, I agree with Mario Alpha. What he was saying here, what started this whole debate and talk was, it's basically the Barbra Streisand effect. Chuck Schumer, by saying he wants to put a resolution in to condemn Nick Fuentes, is actually just going to get more and more people to talk about him. And what a lot of the adults and the boomers and the politicians don't understand is that he is a very memeable, and in ways it's more of a cultural way of talking to each other about politics without actually, like, most people maybe don't even agree with him, but he's become such a meme and he talks in such convincing ways that just with the clips, it's easy for him to be spread out through Gen Z and other people that are frustrated and do have those same frustrations without fully having to grasp or watch his whole 3-hour, who knows how long his show is, segment. And just with those clips, that's what's made him so popular and big. And by being controversial as well, on purpose, which a lot of these people like Chuck Schumer and the boomers don't understand that's what he's doing.
He's catching a ton of flack for proposing National Socialism, and I can understand why he's catching flack, but they're only pushing him more into the mainstream. We have an article in a little bit with Hassan Piker that's outright promoting communism, yet he's catching no flack for that. Like, the mainstream is embracing him for that, which is crazy.
Well, maybe because people fully know he's a full-on retard. Speaking of Hassan Piker...
Oh, was that the next story?
Yes,
oh,
from Nick Sortor, but it melds in well. It's official. President Trump has just signed an executive order directing Secretary Rubio to classify the Muslim Brotherhood as a foreign terrorist organization.
This wasn't the Hassan Piker
story. No, but that's why I said,
yeah.
Speaking of Hassan Piker, terrorist organization.
And
Trump's order also prohibits financial transactions with them, so much of their funding will likely go dry.
And you were actually talking about this the other day. That's why I put this up. You said, man, there is just a ton of anti-Muslim stuff coming online.
Gladly.
And what we're seeing is there was a ton of anti-Israel sentiment. I think they're trying to push that off onto the Muslims now. I think overall, you don't need to be anti-Muslim or anti-Israel, but you should be pro your own country.
Yes.
And yeah, that's what I think overall.
Pro having opportunities for your people, pro not having Sharia law or other laws from other religions implemented within your state or your country, or being forced to follow those if it goes against your culture and your national tradition, etc., etc.
But I do think there is this unorganic or inorganic push against the Muslims right now. I know I actually play a lot of stories like that on here myself, but I think that Israel's trying to take the heat off of them by putting it on to the Muslims. And I think it will work overall.
Well, I don't have Israel derangement syndrome like some people, but I do agree that it was a little bit out there. But we also saw that in Texas, in Minnesota, and a lot of places where there are these Muslim enclaves, it's starting to heat up between the Americans and the people that are there trying to implement their own way of living and their own laws that go against, again, America first, and that should be Mexico first, blah, blah, blah,
Well,
first.
it's very interesting because they're so against funding Israel, which I can completely agree with. Let's cut off funding to Israel and let them kind of defend themselves.
Yes.
But they're letting these enclaves of Islam just come up in the United States, whether it's these mega cities in Texas, or they have the big voting bloc in Minnesota, or even in the UK. I mean, they're completely embedded in there. How did it get to this level? They should have cut it off a long time ago. They're trying to cut off funding to Israel, cut off a lot of this.
And it's not like it's not obvious what they're trying to do. We have seen imams and videos of imams fully saying, we have to take over the US. We have to take control of the US. This is our new purpose in life, to come to the US and take over. And the fact that they are actually serious about it, even if they might not fully be able to implement it or the US people won't accept it. We've seen what happens in the UK when you introduce a culture that has nothing to do with a local culture, that doesn't want to integrate. And on top of that, that has very murky and in a lot of ways violent laws that they have to follow.
Well,
like we see the effects of that.
I understand there is freedoms and things like that in these countries. So a lot of things, a lot of people are going to say you might not like. That being said, at the point you're starting to implement Sharia law and put that over the...
Or even talk about it.
Or put that a Sharia court above a normal court, or have a community subject to a Sharia court, it needs to stop at that point.
Mm-hmm. Especially in a country that wants to continue to call itself America first, but also with Christian nationalism rising, well, do something about the other kind of religion that's trying to come in and usurp
You need to have an identity for all these countries. Mexico definitely has an identity, and people that move here should adopt that identity to an extent. America has an identity as well. Canada has completely lost its identity, and it's now just a bunch of different foreign groups with a bunch of small independent interests all working against each other, and the country doesn't work anymore.
Mm-hmm. Same as the UK, and they're trying to rescue the UK, but they're being thwarted by their own government.
Yeah.
Just for putting a damn flag up. Rafa says screw both. And I agree.
Yeah.
Screw both. Again, each country, each citizen should be focusing on bettering their country for themselves, for the people around them, and for their children, and have them. Like Rafa.
Yeah.
You're doing good. But speaking of Israel, do you want to go to Are You and Billy? Or
no, we got quite a few stories, don't we?
I know. Still.
Okay, well, we'll just go longer today.
Because then I have to do the Spanish.
I know.
Speaking of...
I think 2 hours is what we need to start pushing it to.
Okay, so now the show will be 2 hours. Speaking of Israel derangement syndrome, and I don't agree with any of the people here on screen, funnily enough, from Shadow of Ezra, Anna Kasparian, who has gone full on crazy. But she was getting based, and then she went off the cliff towards the Candace Owens
but
side.
It's funny to see the other guy who actually, he's a Democrat that defended Trump, surprisingly, but he was all over the Epstein files as well. He sued because people said he was in there, so I'll watch my words here. But
okay, so from Shadow of Ezra, Anna Kasparian destroys Alan Dershowitz and Josh Hammer, each of whom tried to run cover for Jeffrey Epstein's international disgusting children ring. Dershowitz argues that calling out elite, disgusting people in government is basically McCarthyism and insists everyone deserves due process. Josh Hammer falsely claims Americans don't care about the Epstein stuff because he was working for the CIA to blackmail.
Well, and this is becoming a huge talking point through these rhino Republicans that nobody cares about the Epstein files. We care about the Epstein files. We're watching it, and it's going to reflect in the midterms if prosecutions do not happen at this point.
And funnily enough, in that sense, I do agree with Nick Fuentes when he explained why people care so much about the Epstein files. It's not even the files themselves or the discovery, but it is the being able to break down and remove the people that have been so corrupt and show that corruption to the world within U.S. government on both sides. Okay, let's see.
Anyone who's framing this as a partisan issue, and I will concede that corporate media, legacy media, they're hyper-focused on some made-up partisan angle here. This is not about partisanship. This is about justice for the survivors, and it's about knowing whether or not we have disgusting pedophiles governing us in the government. That's respond to that, Alan, and then I'm going to move us on.
Sorry, I have to say something. You said.
And it's not just about PDF files in the government. It's about any kind of corruption that comes out in these documents needs to be prosecuted. They've been covered up for far too long. There needs to be extremely harsh sentences doled out, especially for the elites.
Just like Joseph McCarthy, we have pedophiles running our government.
Okay,
we have
sure.
pedophiles in position of authority. That's what Joseph McCarthy did. I have a list of pedophiles who are running America. You are a McCarthyite. You are the worst violator of due process. You are exactly what this country has to be afraid of. Shame on you.
This brings me exactly. I would be more afraid of a guy who signs up to be the defense attorney for said pedophile, the guy who in 2018 provided legal counsel and advice to Harvey Weinstein. It is interesting. Has there been a convicted, pedophile or a bad actor that you haven't signed up to defend? I think your credibility on this matter is lacking.
For me, this whole
and he does have a very questionable history. That's what makes
bad people
the fact
need
that he
defense
even said
attorneys.
that and he didn't shut his mouth at that point. I was very surprised because I knew who he was, but I follow politics very heavy.
Epstein mess is probably ranks somewhere between the 40th and 50th most important issue, if that I care about. The median American does not give a crap about this. I am sorry to say that is just
That's
the
not
case.
what the polling
American
indicates.
cares about cost of living, cares about inflation, they care about affordability, they care about paying for their mortgages, they care about not having to make a trade-off in the local supermarket between chickens and eggs when you get to the cashier to pay for your groceries. They care about the cost of housing, they care about immigration, they care about crime.
They care about both.
They care about a million other things rather than this.
Why would Trump feel pressure to release the files if there isn't overwhelming? There's a groundswell of support in releasing the files, both on the left and.
Yeah, that's 90. There's probably 90%
Another.
between the left and the right. This is a nonpartisan issue.
Yes.
And why are groceries costing so much? Because there's so much corruption in our system. That seems to be a through line of what we're talking about is corruption.
Yes.
And this
Well,
is
that is the through line in politics, just in general.
Well, this is an opportunity to realign the citizens with the government and show that the government is trying to root out this corruption in a very visible way. Opportunities like this don't come up all the time, and Donald Trump seems to be fumbling this ball hugely.
And I do agree with Anna there at the end by saying people and the polling actually does show that especially the younger voters do care a lot about the Epstein files because it is a great opportunity to take out all of the people that were most corrupt and most involved in the things that we already know they all did. And I think something like that does need to happen. For example, here in Mexico, I'm working on a video about Morena and the corruption and everything that's happening, and also for English to explain what the hell the protests were and what is happening in Mexico, because I have seen a lot of information that's not fully getting to the actual meat and potatoes of it. But here in the US, I would say it's even a bit easier to get rid of all of that because we have seen at least some movement in trying to prosecute some people at least, and the interest from the citizenry. Here in Mexico, people seem to just not care. And they're just like, we've been failed for so long in so many ways that it's hopeless to even try to imagine something could happen.
Trump kind of sparked a populist movement in the United States, and independent media, independent voices, and social media gave a voice to the voiceless. And that's why there's renewed interest. And it's expected that there will be not only prosecutions off of these files, but bipartisan prosecutions. If Trump's washed these files and all we get is Democratic prosecutions, it's not enough for me.
And Rafa says, what that goblin said is really stupid. Why are they so desperate to push that under the rug? Because they're probably implicated.
Well, they're both Israel first, both of those gentlemen on there as well.
Yeah.
So I will say that.
But again, and IDS runs deep.
It's come out in the most recent trove that Epstein was definitely linked with Mossad. So,
but again, IDS runs deep. But I think it's more that yes, he has worked on a lot of cases that are connected to the files, but he might be embroiled, and a lot of them might be embroiled, and a lot of their dealings and a lot of the things that benefit them will be within that if it does get prosecuted, and at least they might be called to the stand, and at most they might actually be on the stand. But let's see, continuing to talk about the...
okay, put it on
I can't segue it, but Hassan Piker. From Colin Rogg streamer Hassan Piker retard. Hassan Piker says communist China is the best example of a country that the United States should learn from and model after. Konstantin Kisin says, is there a country that has done socialism the way that you like? And he said China.
Yeah, and I've made this argument in the past. If you play the Democrats' ideology all the way out, where they had unfettered power, it would become communism. Not only Chinese communism, but a far more authoritarian communism than even China. I think the Republican Party went, or at least the old Republican Party, you play that ideology out, I see you would have a system very similar to Russia. But the fact that nobody is really saying anything about Hassan Piker in the mainstream media about this, and Nick Fuentes is catching heat, rightfully so, this is just as bad as National Socialism.
And if you don't follow trigonometry or don't know who they are pretty good. And they were around the U.S. doing a bunch of interviews with pretty interesting people.
You like them better than I do, but they do have interesting interviews, even though
Dana White to Sam Harris to Piker.
You said something interesting because, I was born in the Soviet Union, so we both have direct experience of socialism in various shapes and forms. You talked about, well, there's positives and there's negatives. So is there a country that's done socialism the way that you like?
I would say that I am hypercritical of all forms of governance, including the American one. I think that's not a surprise to you guys, right? And in that same vein, I think there is critiques to apply to all forms of governance, even socialist ones.
Yeah.
And as far as getting closer to what I think has been relatively successful, because if ultimately the point of government is to improve the material conditions of all people to the best of your ability, it's not always going to be perfect, but when you are getting, I don't know, the poorest people, the poorest of the dispossessed masses out of a situation where they were servile, the landed gentry, or they were peasants from an agrarian society, or they were dominated by their landlords, but then ultimately they were able to come into modernity and become like a powerhouse, an industrial powerhouse that is competitive with the largest superpower on the planet. I would say if that's the point of good governance, and I think you guys might agree with me on that, I would say China is probably the closest. And there are still plenty of failures within the Chinese system as well, plenty of issues within the Chinese system as well. But that's probably the closest, I would say, to an example.
And we have to point out here that the Chinese model of communism is a national model, and we have Nick Fuentes currently trying to reach over to the most radical left wing, which would be Hassan Piker's wing, and he's saying he wants communism and that China is the model. So he's already willing to accept nationalism into his model. So there is that unifying factor there between the far right and the far left, which they're kind of coming closer and closer together every single day with this idea of National Socialism. And that's kind of why I put this clip in here. I really think you're going to see Fuentes and Hassan Piker pitch this to the young people and pitch this to the general public.
But the fact that he said that the whole point of the government is to essentially get the people and give the people and to be there to sustain the people. That is not the point of government. It's to uphold the liberties and the opportunities that people have, but it's not the job of the government to sustain its own population. That's a failing government.
Well, in his eyes, he's wanting to give up freedom in order for monetary profit, I guess.
But again, you don't, if you're giving money to other people, you run out of money.
I agree with you. I think freedom should be the basis of everything, and that you need a moral foundation first, a moral foundation, and then you need freedoms based upon top of that, and then you need to try to benefit the people monetarily, which capitalism should do.
And again, a socialist model or national social, whatever, communist model necessitates, because the government is taking a hold of the people and deciding everything for them, and also commerce, infrastructure, etc., it necessitates the heavy control that is even easier to do within the digital world and within a digital economy and with digital IDs. And we saw it in China during the bad times of 2020 with, for example, the quarantine camps where they
that's
built...
kind of why I put this here.
Yes, this is a quarantine camp in China's Henan province during the bad times. China built over 4,000 quarantine camps, and it wasn't just China. In Canada, they had them in Australia. In all of the countries that were veering towards insane socialism, they started doing this during the bad times.
Well, then when you look at these socialist communist model, the level of authoritarianness that can come in here is absolutely crazy, especially if you add digital ID and digital currency. And I would like to say one more thing about Fuentes and Hassan Piker there. The only thing they're not agreed on at this point is the moral foundation. Nick Fuentes wants Catholicism. What Hassan Piker wants, I don't know. He's very prone towards Islam. There are a lot of unifying things between those two people, so I could see them trying to bring not only communism and socialism together through National Socialism, but also Islam and Christianity together. I think that's the pitch they're going to make.
But it will be Islam and Catholicism, because that's what Nick wants.
Well, global Catholicism.
Which is insane.
No, it's not just regular.
Well, all Catholicism is global because it responds to the Vatican. Okay. Sorry. It's true. That's how they were able to globalize their influence, especially now that they've been infected with Vatican 2.0.
Yeah, but it hasn't always been like that.
Well,
I would say the big knock against orthodoxy is the fact you can look at what happened to the Catholic Church and how it's been completely corrupted at its highest ranks, from the Pope to the most high-ranking cardinals, that it's a complete globalist organization now. Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's what I was saying. But now moving on to other things. From Charlie's Voice Rising, newly surfaced intel claims CIA Director Mike Pompeo secretly opened a back room at Langley for Adam Schiff, giving him direct access to raw intelligence logs and classified communications to weaponize against Trump. According to handwritten Brennan notes later declassified by DNI John Ratcliffe in 2020, evidence outlining Obama's treason-level actions were kept hidden from the American people. If true, one of the most outrageous abuses of power in modern U.S. history.
Yeah, there's a lot of classified documents or rumors coming out of the administration about specifically Barack Obama.
And this is James O'Keefe, before from Project Veritas. Then he made his own media company, OMG, and now he's back, I think. Or they're working together again. They got happy again, but he's an independent journalist.
The first of the intelligence community's surveillance targets appeared to be a former Defense Intelligence Agency, that's DIA head, and would-be Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Another target was staffer George Papadopoulos. In 2018, HPSCI, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, released a 243-page report clearing Trump of allegations that he and his team colluded with Russia to interfere with the 2016 election. However, sources close to the House Permanent Select Committee, led by Adam Schiff, covertly continued working out of a small room in Langley, and he had access to raw logs and communications from agencies like the CIA and the National Security Council. The first of the intelligence community's surveillance...
And this was already kind of talked about before, but it seems like there's more and more stuff coming up.
No, this is a big issue because it's coming back up with the possible peace negotiations between the U.S. and Russia. And if there is a peace negotiation in the Ukraine war and it stops, I think Trump is going to strengthen economic ties with Russia. And the Democrats definitely do not want this. And that's why this is kind of coming up again. Trump wants to cut him off at the pass by kind of releasing a lot of these files and showing that this entire original Russiagate hoax was completely made up, and they're going to try to go back to the well again in order to stop the relations between the U.S. and Russia, which is actually very much needed right now in order to decouple Russia from China at least as much as possible.
And it is because of these kinds of stories, leaks, the press actually doing their jobs in some instances, mostly coming from independent journalists, but also now some of the mainstream press is realizing that that's what their audience and the people and their job as a check and balance on the government or governments is supposed to be. But now from the G20, they don't want that because, of course, they know what could happen. From Ryan Gertison, South Africa, who is organizing, and they've been embroiled in a bunch of controversies, who is organizing the G20 Leaders Summit, is not allowing any foreign media into bilateral meetings. Why wouldn't Carney or any leader say anything? Because I think they planned it that way. They control the messaging, and they want to continue that grasp of the messaging because everything could come crumbling down if this information leaking continues to happen.
So yeah, what happened here at the G20, this became a Ukraine summit behind closed doors, and they the EU and the other major powers outside of the United States, Russia and China, are really colluding together to keep control of this Ukraine war and hopefully push it on. At least they're hoping to push it on. That being said, it's very interesting if this thing does end. This is why I'm watching it so closely. The EU wants to continue this war at all costs. That's why I was very interested when they came back with their counter proposal to Trump. The fact that it wasn't that far off. Maybe they discussed it here, and disengaging from the Ukraine war and creating another conflict along Russia's border at a more at a better time for them, because right now they are militarily extremely weak.
Media is being tightly controlled here. South Africa, the organizer, is not allowing any foreign media, including from Canada, into bilateral meetings. And that means that we couldn't get our cameras into Mark Carney sitting down with his French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, this morning. Now, this is incredibly rare at an international summit like this for media not to be able to attend these kinds of meetings. The Prime Minister's office says that Carney and Macron reaffirmed their unwavering support for Ukraine. Both countries are part of the Coalition of a Willing, a group of nations that are helping Ukraine as it fights Russia. Carney is also expected to sit down with the leaders of the UK, Germany, EU, and Norway today. They're all part of that coalition, too. And right now, they're seized with a deadline that Donald Trump has set. The U.S. president has given Ukraine less than a week to accept his plan to end the war. And the plan puts pressure on Kyiv to cede territory, limit the size of its military, and promise not to join NATO in exchange for the end of the war. Now, those are all longstanding Kremlin demands. Zelensky says it's one of the most difficult moments in his country's history, and it's a choice between losing its dignity or a key ally. Now, the UK, which is leading this coalition, one of them leading the coalition, says that they're meeting on the margins of the summit right now, talking about Trump's proposal, and they want a ceasefire and a meaningful peace negotiations to move forward. Carney is now taking part in working sessions here.
Yeah, so whatever's going on behind closed doors there, this is the big plan for Ukraine. And they plotted at the G20. We're going to have to see what kind of happens. It's going to be very interesting what happens on Thursday. Like they said, that was the deadline. I think that deadline's going to come and go. Maybe they're going to keep negotiating. I think the EU wants to look like they're willing to negotiate, but I think they want to try to put the poison pill in there so this war continues.
And they continue to go back and forth, especially during these days, because from Lord Beeble, Macron says Russia is the one who rejected all ceasefire proposals.
And again, this was from the G20. You can see in the background.
So they wanted a solution in the battlefield when they felt strong, but now they want a ceasefire and they keep going.
And this is complete. The EU, when they talk about this, because they have most control of the mainstream media on this particular issue, they just spout lies and they think people are going to believe it. A lot of what he says here is just completely untrue. Russia has been at every single negotiation when scheduled. Ukraine has not showed up to a lot of them. That being said, it's always the EU that either tears up the negotiation agreement. Boris Johnson tore up one. Let's watch this.
Some scenario where we are is clear. Ukraine, the US, the Europeans want peace, but we want a robust and long-standing peace. I think it's very good that the US posed something to go to a ceasefire and peace, and we have to commend these efforts. But at the same time, as what is at stake is obviously Ukrainian sovereignty and European security. It's normal to have both the Ukrainians and the Europeans on the table to finalize this plan. So this is exactly what we will do tomorrow and the day after in order to make a common plan. Now, we just have one problem, and our problem is not the US on this negotiation at this point. Our unique problem, all of us, is Russia, which started this war. We refused to take the ceasefire proposals in February, March, July, August, etc., and didn't provide any guidance.
Okay, that's good. And I think what kind of came out of this was, if this is negotiated to a peace, they're realizing they don't have the money right now, and they're going to be better off trying to wait Trump out on this and maybe negotiating the peace. Because if they continue to, because the U.S. is unwilling to fund this war, he's kind of put it on the EU's lap. All these leaders finally got to kind of get together and said, well, the only way to fund this war is to pay for it outright, to borrow money, or to seize Russian assets. Either one of those options will end up bankrupting them in the long term. They want to re-engage this war at a later date, I think, where they can get the U.S.'s backing, where the U.S. will put the majority of the money and military weapons up, because the European Union on their own, as they are kind of right now, they can't afford this war. It will literally bankrupt the EU. Okay.
And Rafa says, Guy, you'd really love really graceful videos.
Huh?
He says you'd really love really graceful videos.
Oh,
that's the creator, I guess.
Oh, it must be
or
a creator.
Something.
Yeah. Oh, I'll check it out.
But now, continuing with Carney. From Marianovo, Carney snubs Trump that the world can move on without the U.S., which is just delusional. Canadian Prime Minister retard Mark Carney says global progress doesn't need America after Trump boycotted the G20 summit in Johannesburg, despite the U.S. no-show nations representing 75% of the world's population in trade reached consensus, and Carney says that carries real weight. He announced a record $70 billion investment pledge from the UAE and is striking deals across India, China, and Europe to loosen Canada's reliance on the U.S. I'll speak to Trump again when it really matters. Right now, it doesn't, according to Bloomberg.
Well, we spoke to some liberal friends that are somewhat politically minded, and they absolutely love Mark Carney. There's a movement behind the scenes going on with Carney, the EU, these other Western countries to kind of stand up against Donald Trump and wait him out. That being said, this will absolutely bankrupt the Canadian economy, and I don't. The fact that liberals are buying this up on a global basis, yeah, it's just
but also
beyond
it's
me.
really funny that he's announcing that there's a $70 billion investment pledge from the UAE and that it's striking deals with this and that country, which are the exact same countries that Trump already did negotiations and came to deals with. So he's just, again, trying to pick up Donald Trump's crumbs and say that it's all because of him and that he came up with all of it, when it was actually he followed Trump all around his tour and tried to get the
There's nothing on paper. And when we spoke to our liberal friends, what they said was, what's Trump really doing? He's got these promises, but nobody's actually delivering. But the truth is, a lot of this money is actually starting to roll. And now these manufacturing plants are actually starting to get built. The problem with Mark Carney and a lot of these EU countries, they're getting promises, but they're not actually getting the hard cash, or they're not getting any real results. Okay.
And again, what Mark Carney is actually doing is continuing to try to implement his idiotic globalist plans that he'd helped design when he was over at the Bank of England, the Bank of Canada, and with his Brookfield Asset Management.
But it's not just, he's literally the leader right now of what's remaining of the globalist. Donald Trump has really put a hurting on the global liberal order. And Mark Carney kind of came in from behind the scenes. He's the kind of player that usually wouldn't be up front. He's the guy kind of pulling the puppet strings and building the architecture for the global, the liberal agenda. That being said, now he's the leader of this group of globalists in the EU with Ursula von der Leyen, the UK, and the rest of them. So Donald Trump just needs to keep doing what he's doing, but the midterms is going to be a real point where things could go awry.
And with each move and in each announcement that Carney does, people, or at least I am really wondering, is he really that stupid and retarded? And does he not understand the consequences of what he wants to implement? Or is it all a ploy to continue crippling Canada and just sinking it to the ground because he's actually in cahoots or working with the U.S.? Because he's doing everything the U.S. needs to continue to become and to dominate even further.
Well, I would kind of disagree, because if the midterms go bad and the Supreme Court turns against Trump's tariffs and says they're no longer legal, you can't have any tariffs, the globalists actually have a chance here. I think there is a huge war going on behind the scenes. Mark Carney is leading the division of the globalists, and Trump is leading the other division. It'll look like it was done, but it's not done. These midterms, everything's kind of riding on the midterms and this Supreme Court decision. It will revitalize the globalists and make them believe, yeah, they can just wait Trump out.
I was trying to do a segue to this story, but okay. From Mark Nixon, Mark Carney, AI data centers must be carbon neutral, which is insane, and pay carbon taxes, also retarded. US is dominating AI. Only in Canada do we watch the biggest tech boom in human history and say let's tax it until it leaves, as they have done with every single other industry. Book of Values, there's prosperity for everyone, just not here. And again, we see with all the restrictions and all the taxes and everything that Carney has continued to further from the Trudeau administration and to implement even more, that business and anything that could work in Canada is deciding to leave because there's no opportunities in Canada, including people.
Maybe I'll give the other side of the argument here just a little bit. These AI data centers do use up a ton of power, and if it comes at the cost of your citizens, I don't think that that's appropriate in any way, shape, or form. But these AI data centers should be able, the government should require these AI data centers to build their own power plants, whether that's nuclear power or something else. It shouldn't come at the cost of the citizens living around these data centers. And there's also a huge cost with water. So these companies should have to pay for their water as well. But the government's trying to get in and make this entire new industry. I don't think so.
But also, again, there are other options like nuclear to power these things.
But I want to highlight a few other issues before my time is up. First, the importance of high-integrity, standardized carbon markets.
Yeah, one more thing. Any country that's going to bring in these policies, and he's trying to pitch these policies to all these countries that will basically say you can't have AI in your country, and the only countries that will have AI, at least for the data centers, is the United States, China, and possibly Russia.
And I'm not for AI. I don't think it's a good idea, but it is one of the only few growing industries we see, and it might collapse pretty soon as well.
Well, it's going to provide huge technological advancements, and the countries that actually have the AI data centers are going to have a huge advantage over the ones that don't. And I think Mark Carney is trying to say who's the winners, who's the losers, who gets these data centers, who gets access to the AI on a industrial level.
Have the potential to shift capital flows to those most affected by climate change, including being integrated with JETPs, such as the JETP here, changing the incentives and the financial calculations to decarbonize. I'd suggest that we can catalyze enormous private sector demand for these credits by committing AI data center development to be carbon neutral. We need a price on carbon. I salute my neighbor, the European Union, pricing carbon and putting in place a CBAM. But I want to highlight a few other issues.
Okay. And that's the thing about this carbon economy. It's going to pick winners and losers. Countries like China will win. Countries like the US that's going towards nuclear now will win. Other countries that buy into this will literally have no manufacturing in their country because the price of energy will be too high. And that's their plan for Africa. They want to hold Africa down by making sure they don't get a hold of nuclear and real amounts of energy so they can build real manufacturing. Give them green energy so it's enough for the people to have electricity, but not enough to be profitable. All the profitable industries have to lay in the West, at least in their opinion.
And we talked also Friday, I believe, about the ridiculous investments that Canada has been doing over the years to other countries and sending money that is really needed within Canada to other countries. And now Anita Anand, the finance minister, just has no idea where that money went or what it was used for. Most of it was used for gender inclusivity and gender ideology.
This goes back to the
all of these other countries.
This goes back to the corruption we've been talking about all this episode. The Canadian government is one of the worst when it comes to corruption, especially organized corruption.
And with China. From Brian Gertison, Anita calls spending over $5 billion of our tax dollars in Africa over the past 5 years investments. But have we seen a return? If I remember correctly, most of these so-called investments were spent on gender nonsense. She has no idea where it is.
The ship is sinking in Canada, and they're putting the silverware in their pocket and heading for the life rafts. That's what these politicians are doing.
Well, heading to the U.S.
But I am wondering, though, like, partners say we're not serious, right? We're cutting back the investment, the budget.
Let me just follow up on that. Your original question didn't talk about the budget, so let me just answer a question on the budget, because I think it is important in this moment when there is so much in the media about what does our foreign policy vis-a-vis Africa mean, and I want to clarify. Okay, so first of all, I want to say that Africa is Canada's largest recipient of international assistance, and our assistance will continue. Over the past...
Yeah, they're sending billions of dollars over there, but they're not building them any real infrastructure that can benefit their economy. They want to keep them as bottom feeders and have complete control over that continent. At least Russia and Africa are offering actual nuclear... China and Africa are actually offering nuclear facilities and to build manufacturing in that continent.
Russia and China.
What did I say?
First you said Africa and Russia, and then you said
Russia
Africa and China.
5 years, Canada has invested $4.5 billion in bilateral international assistance programming in Africa to build economies, to support health and education, and to respond to humanitarian needs. So that is the 4.5 billion, that is from the annual budget. But over and above that, you heard earlier today that Canada has made a contribution of $1.2 billion or so over 3 years. That contribution to the 8th Replenishment Summit constitutes 6.4% of the $11.34 billion that were pledged in total.
Okay, that's
so
good.
What I'm trying to
now, one thing I have to say is when they are talking about cutting off funding to Israel, okay, yeah, do that. Canada needs to cut off funding to the entire world, whether that's Africa, and focus on their own people, their own citizens.
And just in general, with international aid, and it might sound cruel or mean, but there should be a benefit to the country that is giving out that aid. Otherwise, you can't justify giving away taxpayer money to other countries instead of using it for your country. If it's not benefiting your country in some way, be it there's less migrants, they're helping develop whatever technologies over there, then don't give it. Give it to the citizens, give it to the actual country.
Well,
again, put country here first.
Yeah, and even the type of aid they actually give out, they give fish rather than teaching a man to fish, meaning they don't build real economic industries in these countries that will constantly replenish the citizens of those countries that they're even giving the help to. They put them in the corner, they make them stay there, and they give them the bowl of porridge while they come in and take all the mining and mineral rights and everything else they need from continents like Africa.
And another big one is the European Union and Ursula von der Leyen, who is the chief of the European Union. From Lord Bibo, Ursula von der Leyen is so rich that she throws money around on everything, into everything in front of her eyes. Now Africa, she plans to spend, and again, all the expenditure into Africa. She plans to spend 150 billion euro in European taxes on an investment program. For some reason, none of the taxpayers dare to contradict.
This is the last-ditch effort to rebuild the European economy. The reason the Europeans are in the place they are is because they were built of paper. They got their energy from Russia. They got their cheap manufacturing goods from China. They got their military might from the U.S. As they lose the energy from Russia and the U.S. is no longer wanting to fight their wars for them in Ukraine, and China is starting to think twice, they're having to go to a region and invest a massive amount of money, hoping they can recolonize them economically.
Second, I want to assure you of Europe's commitment to partner with developing economies, to mobilize investments in clean energy around the world. And here, let me give you 4 figures that are telling. Of the 2 trillion invested globally in clean energy last year, only 2% was in Africa, while Africa has 600 million people who have no access to electricity, and it is the continent with 60% of the world's best solar potential. So this cannot be. We must change this imbalance. And that is at the core of Europe's Global Gateway Initiative. These are 150 billion euros investment program for Africa, of which 25% goes into grids and into interconnectors. And that is also why, together with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, my friend, we launched the campaign called Scaling Up Renewables for Africa. Yesterday, we had a big pledging event. We're working with governments and the private sector.
Okay, that's good.
Sounds like they're using Africa as a dumping ground for all of those green energy technologies that didn't work, because they're all starting to come out and say that climate change isn't such a big deal. We know that solar energy specifically, but a lot of the other technologies used for the climate change and the green energy actually deteriorate and degrade pretty quickly, and they don't work as intended most of the time. So are they just dumping all of that thing they invested into Africa?
I don't think they're dumping it. I think they're building a model to keep Africa trapped. Green energy isn't enough for manufacturing. So if Europe wants to own the manufacturing, they give them green energy that, again, has to be replaced every 10 to 15 years and places those countries in massive amounts of debt that the EU controls. Then they come in and if they build a manufacturing site or something else, they bring in small nuclear reactors that are only used for that one site. So they have complete control over it, and the wider country does not get any real long-term benefit. Russia and China are offering a different model with actually building nuclear. If I had to pick between the two at this point, the Americans and the Europeans have done no real big benefit in Africa. At least try something else. If it's going to fail, it's going to fail.
Someone who continues failing and continually fails is Sam Harris, who recently said that with the Joe Rogan style of conversation.
After this article, we'll go over to RUMBLE.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, the Joe Rogan style of conversation and podcasts and what Elon has done in social media, all of this has amplified misinformation and conspiracy thinking, and it's frankly getting people ended.
Ugh.
I'm guessing referencing Charlie, but again, he was in big disagreement with Charlie anyway, so.
Podcasts in particular have a lot to answer for. Newsletters. I mean, I'm a podcaster and I have a Substack newsletter, and it's like I'm an outdoor cat too. But what Joe Rogan style of conversation in podcasts and what Elon has done in social media, all of this has amplified misinformation and conspiracy thinking to a degree that is just totally dysfunctional, right? And it's doing tangible harm to our politics and to our society, and it's frankly getting people killed. I mean, there's no question. There's no question it got people killed during COVID. There's no question it's causing political combustibility that shouldn't exist. I mean, the real problem is that we are now combustible as a society in ways that would have been unthinkable. I mean, like just look at the assassination of Charlie Kirk. There's a moment there where it's like this one guy gets killed, and we all see it in real time on social media, and then you see the reaction to it. And on the far left, you have, 100 or 1,000 or however many proper lunatics with nose rings who will get on camera and celebrate this guy's murder, right? And they're taken as emblematic of what the left really wants, and what's what the Democrats really want. And now we have an increasingly authoritarian government that's going to respond to all of that in increasingly authoritarian ways, and justify their response with yet another guy with a nose ring saying, "Look how happy he is that Charlie Kirk got murdered." And you've got Elon messaging into all of this, saying that the left wants to kill you, and the left is the party of murder, or whatever the exact quote was. I mean, these are just fucking arsonists who are showing up to the fire, pretending to be firefighters.
And that being said, this is what liberals want. They want more censorship. They're bringing it in all over. They're bringing it in all over the world, and this is exactly how they're explaining it. They've already done it in Australia. They're doing it in the UK. They're doing it in the EU, Canada, you name it. They're doing it. The United States seems to be like that last bastion so far. We'll see if they can continue to hold up.
And they're also scared because if it wasn't for independent journalists, for independent whistleblowers, for Tim Pool, for Joe Rogan, for all of this, a lot of the information that now is taken as fact because it was fact back then would have never even come out. Most people wouldn't have known. But also like the giant effort that it was to uncover the Twitter files and what was going on at Twitter and how government was actually involved and how that wasn't a conspiracy theory. And they're losing also the grasp on being able to call everything that scares them or that they're actually doing, or the confession through projection that they usually do, as Robert Barnes says, because now there's outlets and there's sunlight that people, just regular people, are able to uncover and discuss and debate about, but also to bring the evidence up to the eyes of the general public that they were before able to control.
It's not even the evidence at this point. At this point is they understand they have to silence the conversation now. With digital ID and digital currency coming in, that's what they want to use against the population to have authoritarian control. But the population now has tools that we can start watching the government with radical transparency. And if we start demanding it, demanding blockchain technology be implemented in the government so we can see every action and every dollar, their system will come crumbling down. I haven't heard of a broad spectrum movement really demanding that, but there needs to be, and there's a possibility that conversation comes up, especially now that there's a new political system or kind of shifting, and we're kind of trying to decide what we're going to do, whether it's in the EU or the United States. Things are being proposed. They're being proposed from the top down. It's time for the citizens to start proposing things from the bottom up, like radical transparency through blockchain.
But now we are heading over to RUMBLE. I suggest Rafa come over if you're not already on RUMBLE, because we're discussing Fatima Bosch, Miss Universe from Mexico, and the scandals that have been uncovered and continue to be uncovered. But we'll see you over there. Please do like and subscribe here on YouTube. It really does help us a lot. And we'll see you on Wednesday again at the same time.
Okay, I'm gonna log into Rumble now.
No, you didn't say Rumble. Okay, hold on, Rumble.